Welcome to Harry's Cosmos. Today's adventure: what if Harry and Hermione were crowned Lord and Lady Black as children? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The crowning. The letter that came for Harry Potter on the last morning of June was not made of paper. He found it on the windowsill of the smallest bedroom at number 4 Privet Drive, where the dawn had not yet warmed the glass. It lay flat against the sill like something that had been poured there, a sheet of black so deep it drank the light the way still water drinks a dropped stone. There was no stamp, no owl, no name written in green ink. When Harry touched it, the black moved under his fingers, not paper at all, but a thin sheet of something between smoke and glass, cool and faintly trembling, as though it were breathing in time with him. Words surfaced in it the way stars surface in a darkening sky. They did not so much appear as be admitted. The House of Black calls its blood in its chosen home. The seat is empty. The line is dying. Come, that was all. No address, no instruction, no flourish of seals. Harry turned the sheet over, and the other side was the same depthless black, and the words had gone, and when he turned it back they did not return. He had learned, in 2 years of being a wizard, to be wary of things that arrived without explanation. He had also learned that being wary changed very little about whether they happened. So he sat on the edge of the bed with the black letter in his hands and waited, because the words had felt less like an invitation than like a tide already turning, and Harry had spent his whole life being carried by tides he had not chosen. The window blew open. There was no wind behind it. The latch simply lifted itself, and the panes swung wide onto a sky that was wrong, not the gray suburban morning that had been there a moment before, but a depthless violet dark scattered with stars Harry did not know, stars arranged in patterns that seemed to lean toward him, as if the whole night had turned its face to look. Cold poured in over the sill, a clean black cold that smelled of old stone and cedar, and something underneath both, something like the inside of a struck bell. The black letter rose out of his hands. It hung in the air, unfolding. It went on unfolding past the point where it should have run out of itself, opening into a doorway of dark that stood in the middle of the bedroom where no doorway could stand, and through it Harry saw a long gallery hung with green fire and a far-off shape like a throne, and he understood with the particular certainty of dreams that the door had not opened for him so much as around him, that he was already standing on its threshold, and had been since the moment he picked the letter up. "All right," Harry said aloud to no one, to the cold. His voice did not shake, which surprised him a little. "All right." He stepped through. Hermione Granger was halfway through reorganizing the bookshelf in her bedroom in Hampstead when the wall opened. She had been awake since 5 because she had finished her summer reading 3 days into the holiday and had begun, out of a restlessness she would not have admitted to anyone, to read it again. She was standing on her desk chair with a copy of Hogwarts, a history in one hand when the seam appeared in the plaster between the window and the wardrobe, a thread of darkness, then a crack, then an edge, as though the wall were a curtain and something on the other side had taken hold of it and drawn it aside. Hermione did not scream. She was proud of that later. She stepped down off the chair, set the book on the desk with both hands so that it would not be damaged, and looked into the dark that had opened in her bedroom wall, and the dark looked back at her with an attention so total she felt it on her skin like the heat of a fire. A voice came out of it. It was not a single voice. It was the sound a great many voices make when they have spoken the same word for so many centuries that the word has worn down to one sound, and the sound was her name, and under her name, like a tide under a boat, chosen. "I think," Hermione said carefully to the dark, "that you have the wrong house." The dark did not agree or disagree. It widened. Beyond it she saw a gallery of green flame and black stone, and at the gallery's far end a shape she could not look at directly, and standing in the middle of the gallery, just stepping through from somewhere else, a boy with untidy black hair and round glasses and a black sheet of impossible material trailing from one hand. "Harry," she said. He turned, and his face when he saw her was the most ordinary thing in that entire impossible place, and that ordinariness was the thing that decided her. If Harry Potter was there, then whatever this was, it was not a trick of her own mind, and she could think about it, and Hermione Granger had never in her life met a thing she could think about and been afraid of it for long. She stepped through the wall. The gallery received them the way a great house receives the morning, slowly, grudgingly, as a thing long asleep admits the light. It ran on farther than the length of any house Harry had ever stood in, a corridor of black stone whose walls were hung the whole length with green fire that gave no heat and threw no shadow. The fire burned in brackets shaped like clutching hands. The ceiling was lost in dark, and out of that dark hung chains, and from the chains hung nothing, as though whatever they had once held had been taken down a long time ago and never replaced. The floor underfoot was a single sheet of black stone polished to a depth, and when Harry looked down he saw stars in it, the same unknown stars that had lain over his bedroom window, turning slowly far below his feet. "We're inside the floor," Hermione said. She had come to stand beside him without his noticing, and her voice was low, and it carried in the dead air. "Or no, the floor is showing us something underneath the whole house." She looked up the length of the gallery toward the shape at its end, This is a real place, Harry. The cold is real, I can smell it. Dreams don't have smells. It called you chosen, Harry said. It called me the wrong house, Hermione said, and then it called me chosen, and I would like very much to know which it meant. Sound answered her, and it was the worst sound Harry had heard in either world. A thin, wet, scraping wail, the cry of something old past bearing and angry past sense, and out of a doorway in the gallery wall came a creature so wretched that Harry's first instinct was pity before it was fear. It was a house elf, or it had been one once. Its skin hung off it in folds the color of cold ash. Its eyes were huge and bloodshot and full of a grief that had curdled, somewhere down the years, into hatred. It wore a rag that might once have been a pillowcase and was now the gray of a thing that has been wrung out in dirty water 1,000 times, and it dragged itself toward them across the star-filled floor with its long fingers hooked like a beggar's and its mouth working. Thieves, it crooned, thieves in the deep house, filth in the gallery of the stars. Mistress's house, mistress's blood, and they send it children. They send it a half-blood and a mud-blood. Oh, creature sees them. Creature sees what crawls up to sit in the high seat. The word it used for Hermione struck the air like a slap, and Harry felt his hand go to a wand he did not have because they had taken nothing through the door, neither of them, and they stood unarmed in the belly of a place that hated them. Don't call her that, Harry said. The elf creature laughed, a sound like a wet rag torn slowly in two. Children give creature orders. Children think the deep house will heed them. The deep house has eaten lords, boy. The deep house has worn out the bones of the proud and the pure and spat them into the floor you stand on, and it sends for children. It turned its terrible eyes on Hermione, and something in them flickered that was not hatred, that was almost horribly hope. But it does send, it does call. Creature has waited so long for it to call. Mistress is dead, and the master is dead, and the heirs are dead or in the dark, and the house has been alone, 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 and then the floor woke up. Harry felt it before he saw it. A pressure came up through the soles of his feet, a vast slow attention turning, like the moment in deep water when you understand that something beneath you has noticed you and begun without haste to rise. The stars in the floor stopped turning, they held. And then all together they began to fall, not down, but inward, streaming toward a single point far ahead in the gallery, toward the shape on the seat, and as they fell the green fire on the walls dimmed and guttered and went out, bracket by bracket, hand by clutching hand, until the only light in all that dark was the light pouring up out of the floor and gathering at the gallery's end into a single, terrible brilliance. The throne stood revealed. Harry would try later to describe it, and he would fail, and the failing would teach him something about the limits of the things he had thought he understood. It was not built. That was the first wrongness. No mason had cut it, no smith had forged it. It had the seamless, grown look of a crystal pulled whole from the deep earth, or of a wound that has healed over a foreign thing and taken its shape. It was made of the same black as the letter and the floor and the cold, but where those had only drunk the light, this gave back a black light, if such a thing could be, a darkness that shone. Starglass, Hermione would name it afterward, with the helpless precision of a person trying to file lightning. A single fragment of starglass the size of a standing stone, faceted like a heart, and inside it, deep inside, something turned. The cor atrum, Hermione whispered, and Harry did not ask how she knew the name, because he could feel it too, the name rising in him out of the same dark the letter had risen from. The black heart, the first dark caught and kept, a piece of the sky from before there were stars, folded down small and buried under a house in London, and around it, year by year, century by century, a family had built its name. Harry, it's the ward. The whole house is a ward, and this is its heart. This is what they were guarding all along. This is what the name is for. It's awake, Harry said. It was. The thing inside the starglass had stopped turning and faced them, though it had no face, and the attention that came off it was the same attention that had leaned over his window and opened Hermione's wall, except that now there was nothing between them and it, no glass, no door, no distance, only the dead cold air of the gallery and the wretched elf crouched weeping on the floor and two children standing where no children had any right to stand. Speak, said the heart of the House of Black. It did not speak in words. It spoke the way the letter had written, by admitting meaning into them, by making them know a thing and calling that knowing speech. And what it admitted into Harry in that first instant was not a command but a question, and the question was so old and so heavy that he staggered under it, because it was the question the house had been asking the dark for 200 years and never once been answered. Who will keep me? The line is dying, Hermione said. She said it not to Harry and not to the elf, but to the heart, and Harry understood that she had done the thing she always did, the thing that had saved them in the dark beneath the school and would save them 100 times more before they were done. She had stopped being afraid the instant there was something to understand, and turned the full force of her mind on it and begun to reason. That's what the letter said. The seat is empty. The line is dying. You're a ward, you're the binding that holds this whole house and everything in it, the wealth and the wards and the magic of the family, and a ward has to be anchored to a living will or it decays. It has to be held, and there's no one left to hold you. She took a step toward the throne, and the cold deepened around her, and she did not stop. The Blacks are gone, dead or imprisoned or married out or burned off the tree. There's no Lord. There hasn't been a Lord in how long? Long enough that you're dying. Long enough that you've started doing something you were never meant to do. Her voice dropped. You're choosing for yourself. Yes, said the heart, and the word came with such a flood of relief that Harry felt his own eyes sting with a grief that was not his. To be understood. After 200 years in the dark under the city, to be understood at last by a child the family it had served would have spat upon. Creature made a sound of pure anguish. It answers her. It answers the mudblood. 200 years creature served the noblest house in Britain, and the heart of it answers a thief in a nightdress. It answers her, said Harry, and he was surprised again by how steady his voice came, because she's the only one who bothered to ask the right question. The heart turned its attention to him, and the weight of it was a hand on his chest. Harry Potter, it knew him. It had his name the way the letter had had it, the way the door had had it. Blood of Doria. Blood of the line thinned and turned aside. A cadet branch married into the Potters 3 generations back and never reckoned, never counted, because the daughter who carried it had married for love and been struck from the cloth. The heart showed him this not as fact but as a place, a corner of a great tapestry, a name half burned, a scorch where a witch called Doria Black had been removed by her family for the crime of choosing a Potter, and a faint thread, almost invisible, running on from that scorch down through the years to a boy on a windowsill in Surrey. Blood, the heart said, thin, turned, denied, but blood, and me. Hermione's chin came up. Because I'm not, I have no blood of yours, I'm Muggle-born. You called me the wrong house, and you were right, so why am I here? The heart was silent for a long moment, and in that silence Harry watched Hermione brace herself for an answer she had braced for her whole life, the answer that said she did not belong, that she had wandered into a place that was not hers and would be sent home. He had seen her wear that brace in the great hall on the first night, when the sorting hat had taken longer over her than over anyone, and he had seen her wear it every time a pale-faced boy in green had said the word the elf had said. He found that he had crossed the floor to stand beside her without deciding to. He found that he did not want her to hear alone whatever the heart was about to say. The heart said, because blood has failed me. It opened then. Not the star glass that held, but the meaning behind it, the long catalogue of the house's grief, and it poured the whole of it into the two of them at once, and Harry and Hermione stood in the dark and were shown the House of Black. They were shown the pride of it, 1,000 years of witches and wizards who had taken the names of stars because they believed themselves fixed and sovereign in the sky of the world, who had married cousin to keep the blood pure and watched the blood thin and curdle and turn on itself, who had carved Towger's purr over their door and meant it as a boast and made of it, across the centuries, a curse. They were shown the cruelty, the burnings off, the disownments, the daughters struck from the cloth for loving wrongly, and the sons poisoned for inheriting too slowly. They were shown a witch with heavy-lidded eyes and a mad, sweet smile who had loved the family's darkness more than she loved her own soul, and a boy with a locket who had died young in a cave, and a man, and here the tapestry showed them a scorch so recent it still smoked, a name burned off by mother's wand, Sirius, a man laughing, a man falsely named, a man rotting in a sea fortress for a murder he had not done, while the true murderer slept in a red-haired family's house wearing the shape of a rat. Hermione gasped. Harry's whole body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the gallery. Sirius Black, he said. My, that's Sirius Black, he's the one who, they said the words would not come in order. They said he killed my parents, betrayed them, they've got him in Azkaban. He is innocent, the heart said, and it said it with the flat certainty of a thing that cannot be lied to, a thing that holds every black name and every black deed and knows the truth of each one down in its star-glass bones. He is the last of the blood that did not fail me, and he is in the dark, beyond my reach, beyond my saving, unless a lord should sit my seat again, and a lord's right reach into the world and pull him free. The gallery held its breath, the elf had gone still. Hermione's hand had found Harry's, or his had found hers, neither of them noticed which. The blood has failed me, the heart of the House of Black said again, and now the meaning of it bent toward them both, the great attention narrowing to 2 points of brilliant cold. Pride failed me, purity failed me. 1,000 years of choosing by the cloth and the line, and it brought me to ruin, to a dying ember under a dead city, to one innocent man in chains and a tapestry of scorch marks. So I will not choose by blood, I will choose by the older law, the law the family forgot when it grew proud. I will choose the quick, the living, the worthy, the ones who will hold and not be held. I will choose by what you are and not by what you were born. It showed them, last of all, the right. It had a name, drawn up out of the deep places of the house's memory, and the name was Latin, and the name was older than Latin, the choosing of the quick. It had been used, the heart told them, 4 times in 900 years, in the very oldest days, before the blacks grew vain, the right of a dying house to reach past its own failing blood and crown the living it judged fit. It had not been used since the family had decided that nothing living could be more fit than a black, and the disuse of it was, the heart let them understand, the whole long history of the family's fall. I have chosen, said the heart. I have weighed every quick thing within my reach, every will, every worth, and I have chosen two. Two, Hermione said. The seat was held once before by a pair, the heart said, and the gallery around them shivered with the memory of it, the green fire ghosting back into the brackets for an instant and going out again. Brother and sister, 7 centuries gone in the house's strongest age. One to be the voice and the will, the hand upon the wards and the word in the world. One to be the loom and the law, the keeper of the names and the right of judgment. The seat is too heavy for one. It was always too heavy for one. The proud forgot that too. I will not, and it named them. It named Harry first, not Harry Potter, but the thing it would make of him, the office and the weight, lord of the most ancient and noble house of Black, holder of the voice, master of the wards, the hand that would reach into the world and pull an innocent man out of the dark. The name came down on him like a mantle of cold, and he felt the house turn toward him, every stone and chain and burned name of it, and recognize him. And he understood in that moment of recognition exactly how much he did not want it, how much he had spent his whole life wanting precisely this, to belong somewhere, to a name, to a family, and how little he had understood what the wanting would cost. And it named Hermione, lady of the most ancient and noble house of Black, keeper of the loom, holder of the ledger, the right of judgment, the law of the house made flesh. And Harry watched the brace go out of her shoulders, the brace she had worn her whole life, the readiness to be told she did not belong, and watched something fierce and disbelieving and bright come into her face in its place, because the oldest, proudest, purest house in Wizarding Britain had reached past 1,000 years of its own blood and chosen her, the muggle-born girl in the nightdress, the thief, the mudblood, and named her its lady and its law. Wait, Hermione said, her voice cracked on it. Even now, even crowned, she had to understand. Wait, we're children. We're 12, I'm 13, we can't. There are reasons children don't hold titles, there are laws, there are the Wisengamot, the ministry, the other houses, they'll never, they will not, the heart agreed, with something that was almost grim humor. They will fight you. The proud houses will not abide children on an ancient seat. They will name you usurpers, and they will be wrong, and they will not care that they are wrong. You will hold a throne the world says you have no right to hold. That is the burden. I will not pretend it is otherwise. Then why, said Harry, and he did not say it aloud, but the heart heard him as clearly as if he had. Why us? Why children? You could have waited. You could have chosen a grown wizard, someone with standing, someone the world would accept. I could have waited, the heart said, and the great cold attention of it softened, fractionally, terribly, into something that might in a living thing have been tenderness. I have waited 200 years. I am dying, Harry Potter. I do not have the years to wait for you to grow. And it paused and chose, and Harry would remember the choosing for the rest of his life, and I did not want a wizard with standing. Standing is what failed me. I wanted the 2 living wills within my reach that I judged most fit to keep me, and least likely to become what my house became. I wanted the boy who has owned nothing and covets nothing, and will not be made cruel by power because he has wanted it too long and too honestly. I wanted the girl whose mind is the finest weapon to come within my walls in 300 years, and whose belonging no one has ever granted her, so that when I grant it she will hold it like the rarest thing in the world, because to her it is. I wanted you, the heart of the House of Black said to the 2 children standing hand in hand in the dark, and it was the first time either of them had ever heard those words said and meant. I chose you. Will you keep me? Harry looked at Hermione. It was, he thought afterward, the most important thing he did in that whole impossible hour, not the answer, but the looking. The heart had named them a pair, a paired sovereignty, 2 halves of a seat too heavy for one, and the first thing the named lord of the House of Black did with his new and terrible office was turn to the named lady and ask her, without a word, whether they should do this thing together. And Hermione, who had spent the last 10 minutes being told she did not belong, and then being told she was chosen, and then being told the choosing would make her the enemy of half her world, Hermione looked back at him, and the fierce disbelieving brightness was still in her face, and under it, steadier than the brightness, was the thing Harry had come to trust more than anything else he knew, her certainty, once she had reasoned her way to it. They've got Sirius in Azkaban, she said quietly, for a murder he didn't commit, and this is the only thing in the world that can get him out. She did not let go of his hand, and it chose us, not them, us. After 1,000 years of doing it the other way and ruining everything it touched, it chose to do it differently, and it chose us to do it with. Her chin came up again. I'm not going to be the one who tells it no, Harry. I've been told no my whole life. I know what it costs to be told no by people who should have said yes. It'll come after us, Harry said. All of it. You said yourself, the Wisengamot, the ministry, the old families, will never have a quiet day again. When, said Hermione Granger with the ghost of a smile, have you ever had a quiet day? Harry laughed. It came out of him rough and unexpected in that dead cold air, and the green fire flickered in the brackets as if the house itself were startled by it, as if no one had laughed in this gallery in 200 years, and the stones had forgotten the sound. And he turned back to the throne, to the core atrum, to the black heart shining its impossible black light up out of the floor, and he found that he was not afraid, or that the fear had become something he could carry, which was the only kind of courage he had ever known. We'll keep you, Harry said. The house took the words. It took them the way the sea takes a stone, without violence, without hurry, with a vast and total finality. The cold came up out of the floor, and the star-glass blazed, and the green fire roared back into every bracket the length of the gallery at once, no longer dim, no longer dying, but blazing high and clean and triumphant, and the chains overhead rang against one another like bells, like 1,000 bells, like the whole drowned city above them ringing in its sleep. The stars in the floor stopped falling inward and began to rise, streaming up around the two children in a slow, bright spiral, the soot and the starlight of 200 years of a dying house pouring up out of the dark and gathering over their heads, and the crowns came down. Harry felt his form out of the smoke. It was not metal. It was the house's own soot and the house's own stars, the burned names and the constellation names, the grief and the pride of 1,000 years pressed down into a circle of cold, dark light, and it settled onto his brow with a weight that was both unbearable and exactly right, the weight of a thing he had been waiting his whole life to carry without knowing it had a shape. Names moved in it. He could feel them, every Black who had ever lived, the cruel and the proud and the mad and the few, the very few who had been kind, Regulus, who had died trying to do one right thing, Doria, who had loved a Potter, Sirius in the dark waiting, all of them turning in the crown on his head like stars in a slow sky, and the voice of the house woke in his throat, and he understood that he would never again speak in this house without the house listening. Beside him Hermione's crown formed of the same dark fire, and where Harry's gathered the voice and the will, hers gathered the loom and the law. Harry could see it happening, could see the great living tapestry of the family's names unrolling itself in the air behind her and binding itself to her, every name and every judgment and every debt of the House of Black laying itself into her keeping. And the Muggle-born girl in the nightdress stood under the falling stars with the law of an ancient house settling onto her brow, and she did not flinch, and she did not break, and she did not, this time, brace to be told she did not belong. She lifted her chin and let it crown her. And the tapestry, the great living black tapestry that had recorded every name of the family for 1,000 years and burned off every name the family hated, the tapestry, somewhere in the dark above them, began to re-ink itself. Harry felt it though he could not see it. He felt a scorch mark warm. He felt a burned name begin very faintly to return, the name of a man laughing, a man falsely chained, a man who would, if his godson had any say in it at all, not spend one more winter in the dark than he had to. Sirius, the house whispered in the voice that was now partly Harry's own. The air returns, the seat is filled, the line does not die. The light reached its height and held a single blazing instant in which the two children stood crowned in soot and starlight at the heart of the oldest dark in Britain, Lord and Lady of the House of Black, 12 and 13 years old, chosen, and then, gently, the way a tide goes out, it ebbed. The stars settled back into the floor. The green fire steadied to a low, clean burn. The cold drew back to the edges of the gallery and became merely the cold of a deep old house, and the throne stood quiet, and the thing inside the star-glass turned once slowly and was at peace. And Creature the house-elf, who had crouched weeping on the star-filled floor through the whole of it, lifted his terrible bloodshot eyes to the two crowned children, and what was in them now was not hatred. The hatred had been a thing he had worn over the grief because the grief was unbearable, and the house had taken the grief away, had filled the empty seat that had broken his ancient heart, and what was left, raw and disbelieving and 200 years deep, was the only thing the wretched creature had ever truly been made for. He crept forward across the floor. He bowed his ruined face to the black stone at Harry's feet, and then, with a hitch of breath that might have been the beginning of a sob in something that had forgotten how, he turned and bowed it to Hermione's, to the mudblood, to the lady, to the law of his house made flesh in a girl he would have spat upon an hour before. And he spoke, and his cracked voice in the new-lit gallery was the smallest and most terrible sound of all that night. "The house has a lord again," Creature whispered. "The house has a lady. Creature's masters have come home." For a long moment after Creature's words, none of them moved. Harry stood at the foot of the throne of star-glass with the crown of soot and starlight cold and certain on his brow, and he became aware slowly of the sheer scale of the thing that had happened to him. Not the magic of it, which his mind could not hold, but the human size of it. The fact that an hour ago he had been a boy on a windowsill in Surrey with nothing to his name, and now he was the lord of the oldest house in magical Britain. And that the distance between those two things was so vast that some part of him had simply refused to cross it and stood still on the windowsill waiting to wake up. He looked at Hermione. She was looking at her own hands, turning them over as though checking that they were still hers, and he understood that she was doing the same arithmetic he was and failing at it in the same way. "I keep waiting to feel different," she said quietly. "I thought I'd feel, I don't know, older, grand. Like a person who could possibly hold this, and I just feel like me. The same me who was reorganizing a bookshelf 2 hours ago. That's the part nobody warns you about, isn't it? You get handed something enormous and you're exactly the same small person you were before, except now everyone expects the small person to be enough." She closed her hands. "I don't feel like enough, Harry. I feel like a girl in a nightdress wearing a crown that belongs to someone who doesn't exist." The heart didn't think so, Harry said. The heart is dying, you said it yourself. Maybe it grabbed the nearest, it told us why it chose us. He crossed to her because it seemed wrong to say this from across a room. It didn't grab the nearest, it said it weighed every living will it could reach and it wanted you, your mind, the finest weapon to come into its walls in 300 years. That's not a girl in a nightdress. That's the lady of the House of Black, and she happens to also be a girl in a nightdress, and both of those are true at once, and I think we're going to have to get used to a lot of things being true at once. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that saying it to her made him believe it about himself, which was perhaps how it was going to work between them, each of them better at having faith in the other than in themselves. I don't feel like enough either. I've never felt like enough in my life. But it looked at me and it counted, and it looked at you and it counted, and for tonight I'm going to try to trust the thing that's older than the whole world over the voice in my head that learned to talk in a cupboard. Hermione looked at him for a moment. A cupboard, she repeated. That's where they kept me, Harry said. At my aunt and Uncle S, the cupboard under the stairs, for years. He had not meant to tell her and was not sure why he had, except that it seemed dishonest to stand here crowned and let her think he had come to this from anywhere but the smallest place a person could come from. So when you say you don't feel like enough, I want you to know I'm not saying it from somewhere better. I'm saying it from a cupboard, and the house chose us both anyway. That has to mean something. I'm too tired tonight to work out what, but it has to. And Hermione, the lady of the House of Black, looked at the boy who had just told her about the cupboard, and something in her face changed and settled, and she did not offer him pity, which he would have hated, and she did not offer him reassurance, which would have rung false. She offered him the thing he understood much later had been the beginning of everything between them. She offered him agreement. All right, she said. Then we trust the house and not the cupboard and not the bookshelf and not the voices that learn to talk in either, together. Because I can't do it on my own, I've just spent 10 minutes proving I can't even believe in my own crown on my own, but I think I could believe in yours, and maybe you could believe in mine, and maybe that's the whole trick of it, the thing the heart actually built when it made the seat take two. She managed, just barely, a smile. We hold each other's faith. Since neither of us can quite manage our own. We hold each other's faith, Harry agreed, and the words settled in the deep gallery with a weight that matched the crowns, and the green fire burned a little brighter in the brackets, as though the house had been listening, as though this, not the crowning, not the magic, but two frightened children deciding to believe in each other because they could not yet believe in themselves, was the thing it had actually been waiting 200 years to hear. Creature from the shadows watched the two children with his great bloodshot eyes and said nothing, and crept away to find them somewhere warm to sleep, because the house had masters again, and masters had to be cared for, and the wretched old elf had remembered in the space of an hour what he was for. They did not, in the end, leave that night. There was no leaving, Hermione discovered, when she tried the gallery door, not because it was locked, but because the house had no intention of letting them go before it had shown them what they now held. The door opened onto a stair, and the stair opened onto another gallery, and that one onto a hall, and Harry began to understand that Grimmauld Place, the house above them in the waking city, was only the smallest visible part of a thing that ran down into the London dark for floor after floor after floor. A buried palace of the Blacks that had been folded into the space behind a single London townhouse, the way the letter had folded a doorway into his bedroom. It's bigger on the inside, Harry said. Everything magical is bigger on the inside, said Hermione, with the slightly mad cheerfulness of a person whose entire understanding of the possible had been rearranged twice before breakfast. It's just that usually it's a tent. She stopped at the foot of a stair where a long corridor ran off into the dark, and the corridor was lined on both sides with doors, and each door had a single point of light above it, white or red or gold or a sullen smoking green, and she understood before Harry did what she was looking at. Harry, these are look at the lights, that's Sirius, that's Canis Major the dog star, and that one's Regulus Leo the lion, their constellations, every door is a name. Every Black who ever lived has a door, and the lights lit if, she faltered, doing the arithmetic of it, and her cheerfulness dimmed. The lights lit if they're alive, look how few are lit, Harry. He looked down the whole long corridor, among hundreds of dark doors, perhaps a dozen lights burned, and most of them burned low. A house of the dead with a handful of the living scattered through it like the last embers of a great fire. In one door far down the corridor burned a sullen smoking green that was not like the others, a green that flickered, that seemed to strain against itself, a door that, Harry felt through the voice of the house, did not want to be looked at. Whose is that one? He asked. The house did not want to tell him. He felt its reluctance, a thing he was already learning to read the way he had once learned to read Aunt Petunia's silences. But he was the lord of it now, and the voice was in his throat, and when he asked again the house answered because it could not refuse him, and the answer came up cold and unwilling out of the star-glass deep below. Bellatrix, the house said, of the blood, senior of the living line, in the dark of Azkaban as her cousin is, but not innocent, never innocent, and the reluctance again, the strain in the smoking green, and she does not accept that the seat is filled. She knew the house was dying. Made provision. There's a thing she left in my walls against this day, a writ written in blood, a claim by the old dark law of blood over choice. It sleeps. The crowning has not woken it, but it will wake. When she learns that a half-blood and a muggle born wear the crowns she meant for the pure, it will wake, and it will contest you, and it will not contest you with words. Hermione had gone very still. A claim, she said slowly, by blood against us, because the magic chose us instead of choosing the family. Yes, so it isn't over. She looked at Harry, and the brightness in her face had hardened into something he recognized and trusted even more than the brightness, the look she got when a problem had revealed its true and dangerous shape, and she had decided, all the same, to solve it. The crowning isn't the end of it, it's the beginning. We've been handed a throne and an innocent man to save and a dead family to raise out of ruin, and there's a murderer's curse asleep in the walls waiting to wake up and take it all back, and we're 12 and 13 years old, and we have no idea what we're doing. Pretty much, Harry said. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Down the corridor, the doors of the dead burned dark and the few doors of the living burned low, and far away the green door strained against its sleep, and above them, somewhere in the waking city, the sun was coming up on a London that did not yet know the oldest house in it had crowned 2 children in the night. Right then, said the lady of the most ancient and noble house of Black, and she pushed her wild hair back off her face and squared her shoulders under a crown made of soot and starlight, and Harry loved her in that moment, with the uncomplicated, fierce loyalty of a boy who has finally found someone who will walk into the dark beside him and reason all the way down. Then we'd better learn fast. The green fire burned steady in the brackets. The house, awake for the first time in 200 years, settled around its 2 children like an old hound around the only fire in a cold house, and waited, patient and ancient and no longer alone, to be kept. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Child rulers. Harry woke the next morning in a bed that had been made for a lord of the House of Black, and the first thing he understood, before he had even opened his eyes, was that he was not alone in his own head. It was not a voice. It was nothing so crude as a voice. It was a presence, low and constant, a sense of the house breathing around him the way a sleeper senses the weight of a cat on the foot of the bed, and threaded through it, distinct, unmistakable, another presence that was not the house at all. He lay still and felt for it. It was warm where the house was cold. It was quick where the house was old. It was, he realized, sitting up so fast that his crown, which had become, in sleep, a thin band of cold dark light resting on his hair, chimed faintly against the headboard. Hermione. He could feel her, not her thoughts. He scrabbled for those and found a closed door where they should be, which was a relief and an embarrassment both. But her, the fact of her, somewhere in the house, awake, her attention bright and busy and pointed at a problem, the particular electric hum she gave off when she was reading something difficult and winning. The coregnate link. The heart had named them a paired sovereignty, 2 halves of a seat too heavy for one, and the house had taken that naming and made it real, had run a thread of itself between them so that neither lord nor lady would ever again be wholly alone inside their own skin. Harry sat in the great cold bed with the thread humming in his chest and did not know whether to be comforted or terrified, and settled after a while on both. He found her in the library. He found it, in fact, by following the thread, by getting up and walking and letting the warm, quick presence pull him down a stair and along a gallery and through a door, and discovering only when he arrived that he had not once had to think about the way. The house had simply opened itself for him, door by door, the green fire brightening ahead and dimming behind, because he was its lord, and it would no more let him lose his way in it than a hand loses its way to its own mouth. The library of the House of Black went up. That was the wrongness of it, the thing Harry's eyes refused at first to accept. He had expected a long, low room. What he found was a shaft, a well of books that dropped away below the floor he stood on and rose above him past the reach of the green fire into dark, balcony upon balcony of black shelving spiraling up and down around a central void, and the books on the shelves were not still. They shifted. They resorted themselves with small, dry rustlings, sliding along the shelves and trading places, as though the whole library were a single, slow organism endlessly digesting its own contents. And on a balcony 3 turns down, seated cross-legged on the floor in a borrowed black dressing gown far too big for her, with a dozen open volumes fanned around her and her crown thrown casually off to one side like a hairband she'd taken out, was Hermione. "You're awake," she said without looking up. "Good. I've been reading for 3 hours and I have approximately 400 questions, and the house keeps bringing me books before I've asked for them, which is wonderful and also extremely unsettling. Did you know we own a Wisengamot seat? We own a Wisengamot seat, Harry. Ancient and noble seat with 11 proxy votes attached to it, which is a staggering amount of political power, and it has been sitting empty and unvoted for 9 years because there's been no lord to hold it, and the moment word gets out that it's filled, good morning to you too," Harry said, and sat down on the floor across from her, and the thread between them gave a little pulse of something that was almost pleasure, almost relief, the simple animal relief of the 2 of them being in the same place. He chose not to examine it. "How do you know all that? We've been here one night. The house tells me." She did look up then, and her eyes were bright and slightly wild with the particular joy she only ever showed over a truly enormous problem. Not in words, I read, and the house fills in. It's the loom, Harry, the thing the heart gave me. It's not just the family tree. It's every name and every debt and every right and every law the House of Black has ever held, all of it, the whole administration of an ancient house, 800 years of it, and it's in my head, or it's somewhere I can reach, and I can feel the shape of it even when I can't see the detail. She pressed the heel of her hand briefly to her forehead. It's a lot, I'm not complaining. It's the most extraordinary thing that has ever happened to me, and I would not give it back for anything. But it's a lot, and the voice does the same for me, Harry said slowly, finding the words for a thing he had felt all morning without naming. The house, I don't have to ask it where to go, I don't have to ask it to open doors. It just does because you're its will, Hermione said. That's what the heart said. You're the voice and the will, the hand on the wards and the word in the world. I'm the loom and the law, the keeper of the names and the right of judgment. She gestured at the books around her, at the spiraling shaft of the library, at the whole vast buried house. You're the one who acts, I'm the one who knows, and neither of us is any use without the other, which is— She stopped, and a faint color came into her face, and she looked back down at her books with a briskness that did not fool him at all, which is presumably the point. A seat too heavy for one. Anyway, you should eat something. Creature s been hovering. The creature had indeed been hovering, and the change in the elf was the strangest, and in some ways the most moving thing of that strange morning. He had cleaned himself. The rag had been replaced by a pillowcase that was, if not white, at least gray in an intentional way, and the folds of ashen skin had been scrubbed, and the bloodshot eyes, while still bloodshot, no longer held the curdled grief that had made them so terrible in the gallery. He served them breakfast in a small bright room that he had clearly spent the night excavating from 200 years of dust, a real fire in the grate, real morning light through a window that looked out onto a grim old place that did not, from the inside, seem to know it was the gate of a buried palace, and he served Hermione first. That was the thing Harry noticed. Creature served Hermione first, the lady before the lord, with a precise and ancient courtesy, and when he set the plate in front of her his cracked old voice was almost steady. The lady will take egg, he said. The lady was reading all the night and ate nothing. Mistress would never— He stopped himself, and his ears trembled, and he started again. The house is glad the lady eats. Creature is glad. Thank you, Creature, Hermione said gravely. She had clearly decided something in the night about how to be with the elf, and Harry watched her do it and learned from it. She did not condescend, and she did not pretend the cruelty of the gallery had not happened, and she did not flinch from him. She treated him exactly as what he now was, a servant of her house and a creature 200 years in grief, owed both work and care. This is the first proper breakfast I've had since term ended. I'm grateful for it. The elf's face did a complicated thing, and he retreated to the fire to hide it. He called me a— Hermione started low when Creature had gone. I know, Harry said. Last night, he'd have spat on me yesterday. She turned her cup in her hands and watched the elf's hunched, grateful back. And now he serves me first and calls me the lady like it's the most natural thing in the world. People keep doing that, Harry. The house, the elf. Yesterday I was a thief in a nightdress, and today I'm the law of an ancient family. It happened in one night. It happened because a piece of rock under London decided it, and everyone just accepts it. She set the cup down. That's the part that frightens me, not the curse in the walls. The fact that a name can change everything about how the world treats you overnight for no reason that has anything to do with who you actually are. I was the same person yesterday. I was exactly as worthy of being served breakfast yesterday. The only thing that changed is the name. Harry thought about Privet Drive, about the cupboard, about being the same boy in the cupboard that he had been in the bedroom, about a name that had made him a hero in one world and a freak in another without his ever having done a single thing to earn either. I know, he said again. Believe me, I know exactly. And the thread between them pulsed, warm, and for a moment neither of them was alone with the thing they knew. The owl came at noon, and it was the first shot of the war. It came not to the breakfast room but to the front hall, and the house announced it to Harry through the voice the way a butler clears his throat, a turning of attention toward the door, a sense of something arriving that the wards had inspected and found legitimate and deeply unwelcome. The envelope it carried was heavy cream parchment sealed with green wax, and the seal was a serpent coiled about a wand, and Hermione knew the crest before Harry did. Malfoy, she said. That's the Malfoy seal. The letter inside was a triumph of its kind, and they read it together at the long table in the drawing room, heads bent over it, and Harry felt his temper rise with every immaculate line and felt, through the thread, Hermione's mind sharpen and cool in exact proportion, his heat and her cold balancing, the way the heart had built them to. It was addressed with exquisite and deliberate insult, not to the lord and lady of the House of Black, but to the present occupants of number 12, Grimmauld Place. It expressed, in language so courteous it drew blood, the profound concern of Lord Lucius Malfoy, who reminded them that his wife, Narcissa, born Black, was among the nearest living blood of the house at the irregularity of recent events. It noted that the magic of an ancient house was a delicate and ancient thing, easily counterfeited, easily coerced. It observed that the law had long held that the headship of a noble house could not pass to a minor, and that a regency must therefore be appointed, and that no one was better placed to serve as regent and protector of the imperiled Black estate than the husband of its nearest blood. It offered with grave generosity to relieve two confused children of a burden far too great for them, and to see them safely returned to their proper guardians, and it requested the favor of an interview at their earliest convenience, and it was, from its first word to its last, a declaration of intent to take everything they had been given and leave them with nothing. "He's not wrong about the law," Hermione said. She had read it twice fast, and Harry could feel her already 3 moves ahead, laying the letters logic out like a board. "That's the dangerous part. He's not lying. There is a law about minors and noble houses. I felt it last night in the loom. The Wisengamot can appoint a regent for a minor heir. He's going to use a true law to do a false thing, and he's going to do it in language so polite that if we lose our tempers, we look like exactly the impulsive children he says we are." She looked up. "How do you feel about him?" "I want to set the letter on fire," Harry said honestly. "Good, hold on to that, but don't do it where anyone can see." A flicker of a smile, "Because here's what he's actually telling us under all the courtesy. He's telling us he knows. The crowning was last night, Harry, we told no one. And by noon today Lucius Malfoy has not only heard about it, he's written, sealed, and sent a legally framed challenge." "Which means either the house leaks, or someone who was here told him," Harry said, and they both, at the same moment, thought of the green door at the end of the corridor of the dead, the smoking door that strained against its sleep, and the thing the house had said she made provision. "She does not accept that the seat is filled. Narcissa is Bellatrix's sister," Hermione said quietly, "and Lucius's wife and the nearest free blood of the house." She pulled a fresh sheet of parchment toward her. "We need to answer this today before he can frame the silence as confusion, and we need to answer it in a way that does 2 things at once, refuses him completely, and refuses him so correctly that he can't use the refusal against us." She paused, quill lifted. "Harry, you're the voice, you're the one who acts, but I'm the one who knows the law he's trying to use. So this is how it's going to work between us always. You decide what we do, and I make sure that when we do it in a way that can't be turned into a weapon against us. Is that all right?" "That's the best offer I've had all day," Harry said, and meant it, and pulled a chair around to sit beside her instead of across from her, and they wrote the letter together. It was short. It was, on Hermione's insistence, scrupulously courteous, more courteous than Malfoy's, which was itself a kind of attack. It thanked Lord Malfoy for his concern. It informed him, in the formal style the loom supplied to Hermione's hand as fast as she could write it, that the headship of the most ancient and noble house of Black had been conferred not by appointment, not by inheritance, and not by any process the Wisengamot was competent to review, but by the house's own ancient magic, through the rite known as the choosing of the quick, a rite older than the Wisengamot, older than the ministry, older than the laws Lord Malfoy so kindly cited. It noted that the law concerning regency for minor heirs applied to heirs, and that the Lord and Lady of the House of Black were not heirs but holders, crowned and confirmed by the Cor Atrum, and that there was therefore no vacancy for a regent to fill. It declined his generous offer. It signed itself in 2 hands, Harry, Lord Black, and Hermione, Lady Black, and the moment the second signature was dry the parchment sealed itself. Harry watched it happen with the crest of the House of Black, 2 children's names under a 1,000-year crest, and the wax was black and shone like star-glass. "He's going to be so angry," Hermione said with deep satisfaction, watching Creature bear the letter reverently away to the owl. "Good," said Harry. The goblins recognized the seat before the wizards did, which Hermione said later was the most important thing that happened in their first week, and Harry only fully understood why much later. They went to Gringotts because the loom told Hermione they must, because an ancient house that did not present itself to the bank within a span of days of a change in headship was, by old goblin custom, presumed to be in abeyance, and a house in abeyance could have its vaults sealed and its affairs frozen pending a determination. And a determination was precisely the kind of slow administrative limbo in which a man like Lucius Malfoy could do a great deal of quiet work. So on the 3rd day they went, under hooded cloaks the house provided, 2 children walking up the white steps of the bank into the cool ringing dark of its hall, and Harry felt the thread between them pull tight with nerves and felt his own steady in answer, his calm flowing to her the way her cold flowed to him over the Malfoy letter, the 2 of them trading strengths back and forth without a word. The goblin who received them was named Griffook, and he did not at first believe them. "The House of Black," he said, looking down from his high desk at 2 hooded children, and his voice was dry as the turning of an old page. "The House of Black has had no lord to present himself at this bank in 9 years. The House of Black is in abeyance, and 2 children come to me in borrowed cloaks and tell me the seat is filled." He set down his quill. "Children, do you know what the penalty is under the Treaty of 1612 for a human who falsely claims the headship of a noble house before the Goblin nation?" I imagine it's quite severe, said Hermione, but we're not claiming, we're presenting, and the bank can tell the difference, can't it? That's the whole point of the bank. You don't take our word, you take the house's. She pushed back her hood and then, before Harry could decide whether it was wise, she did the thing that decided everything. She stopped holding the crown down. She had been holding it down all morning. Harry had not realized she was doing it until she stopped, a small constant act of will, keeping the band of cold dark light dimmed and quiet and nearly invisible on her hair, so as not to be seen wearing a crown in the streets of wizarding London. Now she let it go. And the crown of the Lady of the House of Black rose into its full being on her brow, soot and starlight, a circle of dark fire with the names of the family turning in it, and the cool ringing hall of Gringotts went silent, every goblin at every desk turning toward it, because the goblins of all the peoples of the magical world were the ones who could not be deceived about a thing like this, who saw not the wizard but the magic, not the claim but the truth. What they saw on the head of the muggle-born girl in the borrowed cloak was the genuine, ancient, unmistakable crown of an ancient house, conferred by the house's own deep magic, which no human alive knew how to counterfeit. Griffook came down from his desk. He came down slowly, and he looked at the crown for a long moment, and then he looked at Harry, and Harry let his own crown rise to match hers, and the goblin's face did something that on a goblin passed for awe and on a human would have been called fear. The choosing of the quick, Griffook said softly. It has not been done in 900 years. We have the record of it. We keep every record. He looked between them, the boy and the girl, 12 and 13. The house chose the living. It reached past its blood. Something that was almost a smile, sharp and not entirely kind, crossed his face. The old families will hate you more than they have hated anything in a century. You understand that. A muggle-born girl crowned Lady of the House of Black by the house's own magic. There is no insult you could offer the pure-blood pride of this country to equal the insult the Blacks themselves have just offered it. He bowed, suddenly, sharply, a goblin's bow all edges. Gringotts does not care for the pride of the old families. Gringotts cares for the truth of the magic and the keeping of the gold. The house is not in abeyance. The seat is filled. Lord Black, Lady Black, the bank is at your service. Come and see what you have inherited. What they had inherited took the rest of the day to even begin to see, and Harry came out of the deep vaults of the House of Black at evening changed in a way he could not at first name. It was not the gold, though there was gold, more gold than he had imagined existed, drifts and dunes of it, in vaults that the cart took an hour to descend to. It was the weight of it, the realization, growing in him cart by cart and vault by vault, that he and Hermione now held not just wealth but the accumulated power of 1,000 years, debts owed to them by half the old families of Britain, contracts and bindings and obligations, properties and proxies and ancient rights, an entire engine of influence that had sat cold and unused for 9 years and was now, suddenly, theirs to turn. He understood, somewhere in the third vault, why Lucius Malfoy wanted it so badly. He understood, somewhere in the fifth, why the heart had been so careful about whom it gave it to. I wanted the boy who has owned nothing and covets nothing, and will not be made cruel by power because he has wanted it too long and too honestly. Harry stood in a vault full of more wealth than the Dursleys would see in 1,000 lifetimes and felt, instead of greed, a kind of vertigo, and he reached without thinking for the thread, and Hermione was there steady, her hand finding his in the dark of the cart, and they held the weight of it together because it was, exactly as the heart had promised, too heavy for one. The first debt came due on the 4th day, and it taught them what it meant to inherit not just a house's wealth but its history. It came as a visitor, an old wizard named Cantankerous Selwyn, a cousin of the Cabal's Selwyn but estranged from them, who arrived at Grimmauld Place leaning on a cane and demanding, in the cracked, imperious voice of the very old, the honoring of the Black Debt. Creature admitted him because the wards recognized a true claim, and the old man lowered himself into a chair in the drawing-room and looked at the 2 children with rheumy, unimpressed eyes, and told them that the House of Black had owed the House of Selwyn a life debt for 90 years, since a Black had been pulled from a burning building by a Selwyn in 1903, and that he had come to collect it because he was dying, and a life debt unpaid at death became a curse upon the house that owed it. I don't doubt you, Hermione said. She had checked it against the loom even as he spoke. Harry felt it, the swift descent into the ledger of names and the confirmation surfacing. The debt's real, it's recorded, a life for a life, owed since 1903 and never honored because there's been no lord to honor it. But you should know that we can't pay a life debt with gold, and we can't give you a life, and you haven't actually told us what you want. So before we agree to anything, Mr. Selwyn, what is it you've actually come for? Because a man doesn't invoke a 90-year debt on his deathbed for the principle of the thing. The old man's rheumy eyes sharpened, and something almost like respect crossed his withered face, and Harry understood that the test had not been the debt at all. The debt was real, but the old man had come to see whether the children would panic and overpay, or refuse and be cursed, or do the one wise thing, which was to ask what was actually wanted. My granddaughter, Cantankerous Selwyn said, disowned by my son for marrying a muggle, as your house disowns its own. I have read of your Andromeda. The girl is destitute and she is with child, and when I die my son will see to it that she receives nothing, because that is the kind of man I raised to my shame. I cannot protect her past my own death, but the House of Black can. That is what I want for my life debt, Lord and Lady Black, not gold, protection. Make her a ward of your house, extend your wards over her and her child, so that when I am gone there is one ancient name standing between her and the cruelty of mine. That discharges the debt. That is all I came for. And Harry looked at the dying old man asking an enemy house to shelter the granddaughter his own blood had cast out, and felt the rightness of it land through the thread at the same instant Hermione did, because it was the same thing they had already chosen to be, a house that took in the cast-out, and the debt was not a burden at all but a chance to do, by obligation, the exact thing they would have done by choice. Done, Harry said in the voice, and the house heard him, and the loom moved, and somewhere a new thread was woven into the wards of the House of Black, a girl and her unborn child brought under the protection of an ancient name. She's a ward of the house from this moment. The wards are over her. When you're gone, she answers to us, and anyone who moves against her moves against the House of Black. The debt's paid, Mr. Selwyn. And you didn't have to invoke a curse to get us to do the decent thing. We'd have done it for the asking. But I'm glad the debt brought you, because now it's not charity. It's obligation, and obligation holds when charity forgets. The old man stared at them for a long moment, and then he did a thing that cost his ancient pride a great deal. He inclined his head deeply to two children of a house his own had spent decades despising. Came expecting to bully two infants into honoring a debt their ancestors ran from, he said. I find instead that the House of Black has, at the very end of my life, become the thing I always wished my own house were, and it never was. He rose, leaning hard on the cane. I shall die easier for having seen it. Whatever the world says of you, and the world will say a great deal, old Cantankerous Selwyn went to his grave a friend of the new House of Black, for what one dying man's word is worth. When he had gone, Hermione sat down rather suddenly. There are going to be hundreds of those, she said, aren't there? Debts, oaths, obligations, 90 years of them, 200, all unpaid because there was no lord, all coming due now that there is. Every one of them a person, a history, a thing the family did or failed to do. We didn't just inherit power, Harry. We inherited everyone the House of Black ever touched, for good and for ill, and now they all get to come and collect. She pressed her hands to her eyes. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot, Harry agreed, sitting beside her. But that one we got right, and we got it right the same way we're going to get all of them right. You read the truth of it in the loom. I said yes with the voice, and neither of us did it alone. He nudged her shoulder with his. Hundreds of them, fine, we've got two of us, that's the whole design, let them come. Dumbledore came on the 5th day. They had been expecting him. Hermione had said it was only a matter of time, that the headmaster of Hogwarts and the chief warlock of the Wisengamot could not possibly let two of his students crown themselves rulers of an ancient house without taking an interest. And the house announced him through the voice with a flutter of something Harry had not felt from it before, a kind of wary respect, as though the wards themselves remembered Albus Dumbledore and were not certain whether to be glad of him. He arrived alone on foot at the front door, and he knocked, which Harry thought afterward was deliberate, a man who could have come a dozen quieter ways, choosing the most courteous and visible one, presenting himself to the house's wards as a guest and not an intruder. Creature admitted him with deep suspicion. He came into the drawing room in robes of a blue so deep it was nearly the black of the house itself, and he looked at the two children seated at the head of the long table. They had arranged it that way on purpose, Hermione's idea, the two of them together at the head and the visitor's chair drawn back down its length, and his blue eyes went first to the crowns, which they had agreed not to hide, and then to their faces, and what was in his own face was not the disapproval Harry had braced for. It was something more complicated. It was grief, and it was calculation, and under both, faint but real, it was hope. Well, said Albus Dumbledore, this is not at all what I expected when Miss Granger's parents wrote to ask whether I knew where their daughter had gone. He inclined his head gravely to each of them in turn. Lord Black, Lady Black. I confess I have spent 5 days persuading a number of very frightened people in the ministry not to do anything hasty, and I have done so without the faintest idea whether I was protecting two children or being made a fool of by something very old and very dangerous wearing two children's faces. I wonder if you would set my mind at rest. You can feel that we're not possessed, sir, Hermione said, or controlled. You'd have felt it the moment you crossed the wards. You're the most accomplished legilimens in Britain. You knew before you knocked that it's really us. I knew, Dumbledore agreed, that the magic on you is your own and freely worn, yes. He lowered himself into the chair at the far end of the table without being asked, which was its own quiet move, and folded his hands. What I do not know is whether freely is the right word for a choice made by two children at the urging of a piece of the House of Black's deepest and least understood magic. The Blacks were not gentle people, and the things they made were not gentle things. The Cor Atrum, he said the name with a care that told Harry he had not expected them to have woken it, had perhaps not known for certain it was real, is older than the family that kept it, and its purposes are its own. You have agreed to keep it. I would be failing in my duty to two of my students if I did not ask plainly, do you understand what you have agreed to, and is it too late to undo? It's too late, Harry said, and we wouldn't undo it if it were. He met the blue eyes steadily. Professor, the house can get Sirius Black out of Azkaban. The change in Dumbledore was small and total. The hands stilled, the blue eyes sharpened. Explain that, he said very quietly, and Harry understood, watching him, that whatever the headmaster had known or guessed about Sirius Black, the prospect of getting him out was not a thing Dumbledore had thought possible, and that it mattered to him, mattered personally, in a way the politics did not. So they told him. They told him what the heart had shown them in the gallery, that Sirius Black was innocent, that the tapestry of the family held the truth of every black deed and named him guiltless, that the true betrayer of the Potters was alive and at large in the shape of a rat, and that the authority of a seated lord of the House of Black reached far enough into the world to compel a retrial of one of its own blood. They watched the headmaster of Hogwarts listen to two children explain that everything the wizarding world believed about its most notorious murderer was a lie, and they watched him believe it, watched him, in fact, go pale. Because if it was true, then a terrible wrong had been done 9 years ago, and Albus Dumbledore had let it happen, had let his friend's best friend rot in the dark, and the grief of that crossed his old face and was mastered and put away. If this is true, Dumbledore said at last, then you hold in your two crowned hands the power to right one of the greatest injustices I have lived to see. And you are also, the moment word of these crowns spreads beyond this house, about to become the most contested children in Britain. The old families will not abide you. Lucius Malfoy, I see you have already heard from Lucius Malfoy, is the least of them. He is merely the most polite. He looked between them, and the calculation in his eyes had not gone away, would never entirely go away, but it had been joined now by the hope, and the hope had won. You cannot win the war that is coming with gold and an ancient seat alone. You will need allies and standing and time and a very great deal of care. I cannot rule for you, the house would not permit it, and frankly I would not wish to. But I can stand between you and the ministry's first panic, as I have these 5 days. And I can teach you, if you will let me, some part of what you will need to know to survive what you have taken on. He spread his hands. I came here prepared to find a tragedy. I find instead 2 of the bravest and most foolish children I have ever taught, sitting on a throne that the world will spend the next year trying to take from you. I find I would rather help you keep it. Will you have an old man's help, Lord and Lady Black? Harry looked at Hermione. She gave the smallest nod. He means it, and we can use it, and we should watch him all at once. And Harry turned back to the headmaster and said, we'll have it, but we keep the seat. We don't hand it to a regent, not even you. The house chose us. We're going to be worthy of it ourselves. I would expect nothing less, said Dumbledore, and for the first time since he had entered the house, he smiled. There was one more thing Harry wanted to do before that first week was out, and it was Hermione who showed him how, because it lived in the loom and not the voice. She had found it on the second night, deep in the ledger of names, a power of the seat that the Lord and Lady held together, and neither could use alone. The House of Black had, across the centuries, burned off its own. The great tapestry recorded it. Every witch or wizard struck from the family for marrying wrongly, thinking wrongly, loving wrongly, their faces scorched away by a matriarch's wand and their names unmade, cast out of the house and out of its protection and out of its name. Doria for loving a Potter, Sirius for being himself. And Hermione had found this one and gone very quiet, a woman named Andromeda, struck from the cloth a generation ago for the crime of marrying a muggle-born man named Ted Tonks and her daughter with her, a girl named Nymphadora who had been born already outcast, already burned, a black who had never once been allowed to be one. We can undo it, Hermione had said, the Lord and the Lady together. The same authority that burns a name off the tapestry can put it back. We can reinstate them, we can make them black again, bring them back into the house, into the name, into the protection of the wards. She had looked at Harry over the top of the ledger, and there had been something fierce in it, something personal. The family threw them out for marrying outside the blood, Harry, for loving the wrong people, for being exactly what they threw me 1,000 insults for being. And we can stand at the heart of the house that did it and say, no, not anymore, come home. So they did it at the Cor Atrum in the lit gallery, with Creature watching from the shadows and the green fire burning steady, and it was the first true act of their reign, and Harry would remember it longer than the crowning. Hermione held the ledger of names open in the air between them, the loom, and Harry spoke into the voice of the house the names that the family had unmade: Andromeda, daughter of the house; Nymphadora, daughter of the house, and the heart heard him, and the tapestry, somewhere above them in the dark, warmed and stirred, and 2 scorch marks that had smoked for a generation began slowly to heal. Faces re-inked themselves out of the burn, names returned to the cloth. And far away across England, in a small house that the House of Black had spent 20 years pretending did not exist, a woman named Andromeda Tonks felt, without knowing why, a warmth she had not felt since she was a girl, the warmth of a great old house turning at last to look at her, and not with hatred, and not to cast her out, but to call her, after 20 years, home. She came to Grimmauld Place the next morning with her husband and her daughter, and she stood in the front hall and wept, and she was the first ally the House of Black had that had not been bought or persuaded or maneuvered into place. the first who came simply because two children had reached into the cruelty of her family's past and undone one piece of it for no reason except that it had been wrong. "You didn't have to do that," Andromeda said when she could speak. She was a tall woman with Bellatrix's dark hair and none of Bellatrix's madness, and her eyes, when she looked at Hermione, were full of a thing Harry did not have a name for. "Reinstating us, it gains you nothing. We have no power, no votes, no standing to lend you. Ted's muggle-born, Dora's barely qualified as an Auror. We're the poorest, least useful blood you could possibly have called back. Why us? Why first? Because the family hurt you for the same reasons they'd hurt me," Hermione said simply. "And because we get to decide what kind of house this is now, and I wanted the first thing we did with it to be that." Andromeda looked at her for a long moment, the muggle-born girl crowned lady of the house that had cast Andromeda out for marrying a muggle-born, and then she did something that no living Black had done for either of them, something Harry felt land in Hermione through the thread like a key turning in a lock that had been shut her whole life. She curtsied. Low and formal and entirely sincere, the way a daughter of the House of Black greets the lady of it, the muggle-born woman to the muggle-born girl, and she said, "Then the house is in better hands than it has been in 300 years, my lady. And you have one ally now who is yours for nothing and for good." Behind her, her daughter, a young woman whose hair, as Harry watched, cycled startled through three colors and settled on a fierce, determined pink, grinned at the two child rulers of the most ancient and noble House of Black and said, "Watch her. So, I hear we've got a murderer to get out of prison and an entire aristocracy to annoy. When do we start?" "We've started," Harry said, and through the thread, warm and certain, he felt Hermione agree. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Mastering the legacy. The trouble with inheriting an ancient power, Harry discovered, was that the power did not come with instructions. It came with the opposite of instructions. It came with the assumption built into the house, into the voice, into the cold, deep certainty of the core atrum, that whoever held the crown had been raised to it from birth, schooled in its uses by tutors and grandmothers, and the slow osmosis of a childhood spent inside the family's secrets. The house expected its lord to know things, and its lord was a 12-year-old boy who had spent his childhood in a cupboard and had been a wizard for 2 years, and the gap between what the house expected him to know and what he actually knew was, Hermione said on the morning they finally sat down to face it, the most dangerous thing in this entire building, including the curse in the walls. "More dangerous than the curse," Harry said. "The curse is one threat we can see coming." She had spread parchment across the drawing-room table and was, in her element, drawing up a curriculum for the two of them as though they were sitting an exam at the end of summer, which in a sense they were. "What I'm afraid of is the threat we don't see, you reaching for the voice in a moment of crisis, and using it wrong, me touching something in the loom I don't understand and unmaking something that mattered. We hold the entire magical engine of an 800-year-old house and we don't know how 3/4 of it works. We have to learn it properly before someone forces us to use it badly." She tapped the parchment. "So, we have roughly 6 weeks until term. Dumbledore will teach us the politics and the law of the Wisengamot side when he can come. Andromeda's agreed to teach us etiquette and the customs of the old houses, which sounds dull and is going to save our lives. But the house itself, the voice, the loom, the wards, the vaults, no one alive can teach us that. The only teacher for that is the house, so we're going to make it teach us, carefully, one power at a time, and we're going to start with the one that's least likely to kill us." "Which is the voice," Hermione said, "because you already use it without thinking, which means the danger isn't learning it, it's learning to control it. And I'd rather you found the edges of it here, with me watching, than in front of the Wisengamot." The voice, Harry learned over the days that followed, was not a spell. That was the first and hardest thing to understand, and Hermione understood it before he did, watching from the side with her quill, because she had read every theory of household magic in the library shaft and had a framework to hang it on. Spell was a thing a wizard did, a shaping of will and word and wand applied to the world from outside. The voice was a thing Harry was. He did not cast it. He simply spoke as the lord of the House of Black, and the house which was bound to obey its lord did what he said, not because the words carried power, but because the house had agreed 1,000 years ago to treat its lord's word as its own will, which meant the danger was not in failing to make it work. The danger was in it working too well. He found that out on the 4th day in the long gallery of the constellation doors, the corridor of the dead and the few living, where he had gone to learn to read the house's deeper structure. He was tired and frustrated, and a door he was trying to open, a minor door, the door of some long-dead Black named for a dim and forgotten star, had stuck, and Harry, without thinking, with the impatience of a tired child, said, "Open," in the voice, and put his temper behind it. The door did not open. The door came off its hinges and the wall around it, and a span of the gallery 10 feet wide tore itself out of the fabric of the house with a shriek of unmaking, because Harry had not told the door to open. He had told the house to open, and the house, which could not distinguish a tired boy's irritation from a sovereign command, had begun, obediently, faithfully, catastrophically, to do exactly that. "Stop!" Hermione shouted, not in any voice, just in her own, just a 13-year-old girl shouting in terror. and Harry, jolted out of his temper by the fear in it, by the answering spike of it through the thread, gathered himself and said stop in the voice, meaning it, controlling it, and the house froze. The torn span of gallery hung in the air, unmade, a wound in the world with the London dark showing through it. And then slowly, at Harry's careful word, it knit itself back together, stone to stone, name to name, until the gallery stood whole again, and only the smell of it, ozone and cold stone and something scorched, remained to say that for 3 seconds the Lord of the House of Black had nearly torn his own house in half because he was tired and cross. Harry sat down on the floor of the gallery and put his head in his hands and shook. Hermione sat down beside him. She did not say it's all right because it was not all right, and she did not say you have to be more careful because he knew that better than anyone now. She sat beside him in the cold with the smell of unmaking around them, and after a while she said, "That's why it chose 2 of us." He looked up. "The voice has no brakes, Harry, none. It does exactly what you mean, instantly, with the full weight of the house behind it, and it can't tell a real command from a tired one." She had her arms wrapped around her knees, and her crown was dim on her hair, and she was looking not at him but at the place where the wound had been. "That's not a flaw, that's a deliberate design. The Blacks built the voice to be absolute because they wanted it absolute. They wanted a lord whose word the house could not question. But absolute power that can't tell anger from intent is a catastrophe waiting for a bad afternoon. So they balanced it. They built a second seat. The lady doesn't hold the voice, the lady holds the judgment, the right to say wait, the right to weigh a thing before it's done." She turned to him. "I felt it just now through the thread, the half-second before you said it. I felt you reach for the voice in temper. If I'd been faster, or if we'd practiced this, I could have caught it before it happened instead of after. That's my half of the seat, Harry. You act, I judge. You're the voice and I'm the brake, and the house is only safe when we're both holding it." A faint, shaken smile, which is a horrifying amount of responsibility to hand a 13-year-old, and also the first time in my life I've felt like the most important person in a room and known I'd actually earned it. So, again, slower. And this time, when you feel your temper come up, you stop and you wait for me. They practiced that for 2 days, not the voice itself, but the break, the link, the half-second handoff between his will and her judgment, until it became a thing they could do without speaking, until Harry could feel her weight land in him through the thread the instant before a command left his throat, until the most dangerous power in the house had a second hand on it that was not his own. And something settled between them in those 2 days that had not been there before, something past trust, something that lived below words. The knowledge that each of them now held a piece of the other's safety, that the boy could not be trusted alone and the girl could not act alone, and that this was not a weakness in either of them but the entire point, the thing the dying house had reached past 1,000 years of its own pride to build. Creature came over fully on the night of the locket. It had been sitting in the house's accounting all along, a single discordant note in the loom that Hermione kept circling back to, a debt the House of Black owed that had no creditor, an obligation with no name attached, a wrongness in the ledger like a splinter under a nail. She worried at it for a week before she understood it was not a debt of gold at all. It was a debt of grief, and it belonged to Creature. He told them the story badly in pieces because it had been killing him slowly for years, and the telling was a kind of dying. The young master, Regulus, the boy with the locket, the Black whose door burned low in the gallery of the dead because he was dead, dead at 18, dead in a cave. Creature had been made to watch him drink himself, dying in service of a terrible thing. A locket. A piece of the Dark Lord's own soul, though Creature had not known the word for it, had only known that his young master had ordered him to take it and destroy it and tell no one, and that Creature had failed, had carried it home and tried and failed year upon year, because the thing could not be destroyed by any magic the elf possessed, and the failure had rotted him from the inside for the better part of 2 decades. The curdled grief in the gallery, the hatred worn over the wound. Mistress is dead, and the master is dead, and the heirs are dead. The young master Regulus had given the wretched Creature one last order, and the wretched Creature had loved him and failed him and been alone with the failing ever since. "We can finish it," Hermione said, when the whole broken story was out. She had gone white over the word she now had for the locket, Horcrux, a word she had found in the very deepest and most warded shelf of the library, in a book that had tried to bite her, and she had gone whiter still over what it meant, over the fact that a fragment of the wizard who had murdered Harry's parents was sitting in a cupboard in their house. But she had also, Harry saw, already moved past the horror into the problem, because that was what she did, that was her half of the seat. Creature. The young master ordered you to destroy it. You couldn't because no elf magic can, but the house can. The core Atrum is a piece of the first dark. It's older and deeper than anything Voldemort ever made, and it's ours now, and it will do what its lord and lady tell it. We can finish your master's order. We can destroy the locket, tonight, and the debt the house has owed for 20 years, the debt that's been killing you, we can pay it. The elf stared at her. "The mudblood," he whispered, but there was no venom in it now. It had become, somehow over a week, almost an endearment, a thing he could not stop saying and no longer meant cruelly, and Hermione had decided, with a generosity Harry could not have managed, to let him keep it until he was ready to drop it himself. The Mudblood lady would finish young Master Regulus's last order. After 20 years, when Creature could not. "We finish it together," Harry said, "you and us. You carried it for 20 years, Creature. You don't get to be left out of the end of it." So the three of them went down to the core atrium in the deep gallery, the Lord and the Lady and the house elf. And Creature carried the locket on a black cushion held in both his shaking hands, and they laid it before the throne of star glass, the captured fragment of the first dark, and Harry spoke in the voice and Hermione held the judgment steady, and the heart of the House of Black woke, and looked at the small evil thing on the cushion, and recognized it for what it was, a theft, a tearing. A piece of a soul ripped out and hidden in metal in defiance of every law that bound the living and the dead, and the heart, which was older than souls, which had been dark before there were souls to tear, reached out and unmade it. There was a scream. It was not Creature's. It came from the locket, thin and inhuman and full of a malice that was almost a relief to hear destroyed, and then the locket cracked, and the dark inside it boiled out and was drunk down into the starglass and gone, and the thing on the cushion was only a locket, old and broken and empty, and the debt that had been killing an elf for 20 years was paid. Creature wept. He wept the way the very old weep, without dignity and without restraint, and Harry knelt down on the cold floor and let the elf cry against his shoulder, the air of the house holding its servant, and when it was over Creature drew back and wiped his ruined face and looked at the two children with 200 years of grief finally lifted from him, and he did not call Hermione the word again. He called her my lady, and he called Harry my lord. And from that night the wretched Creature served the House of Black not from the broken habit of a lifetime, but from a love that had been given somewhere to land at last. And there was no more loyal thing in all the buried palace than Creature the house elf, who had been finished and made whole by two children the family he served would have spat upon. The loom was harder and more beautiful, and very nearly the thing that killed Hermione Granger. It was hers alone. Harry could feel it through the thread but could not touch it, the way she could feel the voice and could not speak it, and she went into it the way she went into everything, headlong, brilliant, certain she could think her way through anything, and for 2 weeks she was right. She learned to read the great tapestry not as a record but as a living map of the house's bindings, every name a knot, every marriage a thread, every debt an oath, and ward a tension running through the whole vast weave. She learned to touch the knots, to feel the warding loom that underlay the family's protection, the 800-year lattice of magic that made Grimmauld Place unplottable and the vaults unbreakable and the wards a thing that could turn a curse at the door. She learned, she told Harry, more in those 2 weeks than in 2 years at Hogwarts, because for the first time she was not reading about magic but holding it, the actual living structure of an ancient house laid open in her 2 hands. And then she touched the wrong thread. She did not know it was wrong. That was the terror of it, the thing that made Harry's blood run cold when he understood. She had been tracing the wards toward the green door, the smoking door at the end of the Gallery of the Dead, Bellatrix's door, the sleeping writ, because she was Hermione and the most dangerous thing in the house was exactly the thing she most needed to understand, and she had reached in the loom for the thread that bound that door shut, meaning only to read it, to learn how the sleeping curse was held. The thread bit her. Harry felt it through their link like a wire pulled white-hot through his own chest, a flare of pain and shock, and underneath something far worse, a vast cold attention turning toward them out of the deep, the same straining malice he had felt from the green door on the first night, suddenly awake, suddenly aware that the lady of the house had touched the binding that held it. He was 3 galleries away. He ran. He ran with the voice already rising in his throat and the thread screaming, and he came through the door of the warding room to find Hermione on her knees on the black floor with the loom blazing open in the air before her, and a single thread in it gone from black to a livid smoking green, and her hand caught in it, and her face white and rigid and her crown blazing on her brow as she fought with everything she had, the whole fierce, brilliant force of her mind, to keep the binding closed. To keep the thing she had woken from following the thread back up out of its sleep and into the house. "Harry," she said, and her voice was very calm, which frightened him more than screaming would have, "I can't let go. If I let go it comes through. The binding's keyed to the lady, me touching it half woke it, and now it's testing the seal, and the only thing holding the seal shut is me holding on. I can't let go and I can't hold forever. I need you to," her voice cracked just once, the fear showing through, "I need you to do the thing we practiced. I need you to take my judgment, reverse it. I hold the voice's danger for you. You have to be able to hold mine, right now." And Harry understood what she was asking, and understood that they had, without knowing it, been practicing for exactly this for 2 weeks, the handoff, the link, the second hand on the dangerous power, and that it had always run one way, her judgment steadying his voice, and that now it had to run the other, his will lending her the strength to do the thing her own strength could not do alone. He crossed the room and knelt behind her and put his arms around her, his hands over her hands where they were caught in the burning thread, and he opened the thread between them as wide as it would go, wider than it had ever been. and he poured himself into it, the voice, the will, the whole weight of the Lord of the House of Black, and he felt Hermione take it, felt her draw on his strength the way he had drawn on her steadiness over the Malfoy letter. The two of them flowing into one another across the link until he could not have said where his will ended and her judgment began. And together, not lord and not lady, but the single paired sovereignty the heart had built, the seat held by two, they took hold of the smoking green thread and they pushed the waking thing back down. It fought. It was old and it was cunning, and it was a piece of Bellatrix Lestrange's own will written into the walls in blood, and it did not want to sleep again. And for a long, terrible moment it almost held, and then Hermione, with Harry's strength under her judgment and Harry's arms around her in the cold, did the thing only she could do, the thing that was her half of the seat and no one else's. She did not break the binding and she did not strengthen it. She rejudged it. She read the flawed old seal the Blacks had made, and she found, in a half-second of brilliance Harry would never fully understand, the single knot where it had been tied wrong, the gap that had let her touch wake it at all, and she retied it cleaner, tighter, sealing not just the door but the flaw, so that the writ could never again be half-woken by an accidental touch, so that when it woke at last it would have to wake the hard way, the loud way, the way they could see coming. The smoking green guttered. The vast cold attention drew back, baffled, into the deep. The thread went black again, and the seal on the green door at the end of the Gallery of the Dead was for the first time in 9 years sound. Hermione sagged back against him, shaking, her hand sliding free of the dead thread, and Harry held her up because she could not hold herself, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. The loom faded out of the air. The warding room was quiet. Somewhere above them the city went on, ignorant. "I nearly let it in," Hermione said at last, very low. "I went looking for the most dangerous thing in the house because I thought understanding it would make us safer, and I nearly let it in instead." "You sealed it," Harry said, "better than the Blacks ever did. You found the flaw and you fixed it. It can't get in by accident now, you made sure of that." He tightened his arms a fraction. "And I caught you, that's the whole thing, isn't it? That's what we learned tonight. It cuts both ways. You hold my temper, I hold your reaching. Neither of us alone is safe with what we've got, both of us together is." He let out a breath that shook more than he wanted it to. "I felt it when you got caught, through the thread. I felt it like it was happening to me. Hermione, I don't think I could do this with anyone else. I don't think it works with anyone else. The house didn't just give us a power each, it gave us each other to hold the power with." She was quiet for a moment, her head against his shoulder, her breathing slowing. And then she said in a voice that was trying very hard to be ordinary and not quite managing it, "I know, I worked that out in the first week. The link, the handoff, the 2 seats, it's not an arrangement, Harry. It's not a convenience. She searched for the word and found one, and the finding of it cost her something. It's a fusing. The house took 2 people and made it so that neither of them is ever entirely alone again, and neither of them is ever entirely safe alone, and it did it on purpose because the seat is too heavy for one and it didn't want a tyrant, and a tyrant is what you get when one person holds all of it." She drew back enough to look at him, and the fear had gone out of her face and something else had come into it, something quieter and far more frightening, and she did not name it and neither did he. "We're going to be holding each other up like this for the rest of our lives, aren't we? That's what we said yes to, that's what the crowns mean." "Yeah," Harry said, "I think it is." And neither of them said anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying, and because saying more would have been to name the thing they had both just understood, and they were 12 and 13 and not ready for the name, and the house was warm around them for the first time, and that, for that night, was enough. There was a vault under the house that the loom would not let Hermione read, and so, of course, she could not leave it alone. She found it on the 9th day of their mastering, in the deepest stratum of the family's bindings, a knot in the weave that her mind slid off like a hand off wet glass. Everything else in the house had yielded to her, name by name and thread by thread, but this one place stayed dark, a vault far below the Gallery of the Dead, sealed not by the family's wards but by something older and angrier, and the only thing the loom would tell her about it was a warning repeated in the deep voice of the house itself: "Not the heirs to open, not the lords, not the ladies, leave it sealed." "Which is exactly the problem," Hermione said, pacing the library balcony with the warning still ringing in her, "because a house that hides things from its own lord and lady is a house with a weapon in it that we don't control, and I have had enough surprises out of the walls of this place to last me a lifetime. The green door nearly took me, the writ's still down there sleeping, and now there's a vault even the house won't let me look at." She turned to Harry. "I'm not saying we open it. I'm saying we should at least understand what it is before someone like Yaxley does. We can't defend a thing we refuse to look at." Harry, who had learned the hard way what happened when he reached for power and temper, had also learned to trust the moment Hermione's curiosity turned from interest into something harder and more certain. "All right," he said, "but we go to the door and we look, and we do not open it unless we both agree out loud that it's safe. The handoff, same as the voice. You don't get to talk yourself into it alone, and I don't get to be brave about it alone. Both of us or neither." "Both of us or neither," she agreed and meant it, and they went down. The vault door was black iron grown through with something that was not rust, and it was warm to the touch, which was the first wrongness because everything else in the deep house was cold. Hermione laid her hand against it and went still, reading, and Harry felt through the thread the moment she found the shape of what was behind it and felt her recoil. "It's a binding," she said softly, "a bound thing. The Blacks caught something a long time ago, centuries, something they couldn't kill and couldn't free, so they bound it down here and built the vault around it and sealed it away from even the lord of the house, because they were afraid that one day a Black would be cruel enough or stupid enough or desperate enough to let it out and use it." She drew her hand back. "It's a curse, Harry, not a thing that casts curses. A curse itself, given a kind of life, a hunger, the accumulated malice of the house, all the burnings off and the poisonings and the cruelty, pressed down into one bound thing and kept. The Blacks made a monster out of their own worst nature and locked it in the cellar so it couldn't tell them what they were. And the house won't let you read it," Harry said slowly, "because the house is afraid of it too." "The house is ashamed of it," Hermione corrected, and there was something almost gentle in how she said it. "It's not a weapon someone could steal, exactly. It's worse and it's simpler than that. It's the thing the house most wishes it weren't. And it warned us off not because it's protecting the monster, because it's protecting us from becoming the kind of rulers who'd want one." They stood before the warm black door a while, and Harry understood that they had come to the real test of their mastering, the one no training could prepare them for, not whether they could open the vault, because the voice and the loom together almost certainly could, but whether they should, and what it would mean about the house they were building if they did. "We could use it," Harry said, testing the thought aloud carefully with her judgment held under his will as he held everything dangerous now. "Against Lucius. Against the Cabal, a bound curse, the concentrated malice of 1,000 years, that's a weapon no one could stand against. If we let it out and made it ours, no house in Britain would ever move against us again." He let himself feel the shape of the temptation honestly, because lying to himself about it would have been more dangerous than naming it. "It would work," Hermione agreed quietly, "and it would make us exactly what the heart didn't want. It chose you because you covet nothing and won't be made cruel by power. The first time we reach for the cruelest thing in the house to win a fight, we stop being the people it chose, and we become the next link in the chain, Blacks using the family's monsters to hold the family's throne, the way they always did, the way that brought the house to ruin in the first place." She looked at the warm black door. "The old Blacks would open it. That's the whole point of it being down here. It's the test the house didn't mean to set, but set anyway. Every lord and lady who ever held this seat could have used it, and the great ones, the very few great ones, chose not to. That's what made them great. Not that they couldn't, that they wouldn't. And so the lord and lady of the House of Black did the hardest thing their mastering asked of them, which was nothing. They laid their hands together on the warm black door, the voice and the loom as one, and instead of opening it they strengthened the seal, rebound the bound thing tighter than the cruel old Blacks had ever managed, sealed the house's worst nature away not in shame, but in deliberate, clear-eyed choice, and Harry spoke into the voice not a command to open, but a vow to leave shut. "While we hold this seat, the house's cruelty stays bound, and the house's power is the power to choose not to use it." And the house, reading the vow in the deep places where it had hidden its shame for centuries, did a thing it had not done in all the long catalogue of its grief. It relaxed. The warmth went out of the black door. The warning went quiet in the loom. And Hermione, her hand still against the cooling iron, let out a breath and said, "I think we just passed something. I don't think it was on any list, but I think the house just learned it could trust us with the thing it was most afraid of, and I think that matters more than anything in the curriculum." "It matters more than all of it," Harry said, and through the thread he felt the house agree, felt it settle around them another degree, the way a wary animal settles when it finally understands it will not be hurt, and the two of them climbed back up out of the deep, leaving the worst of the House of Black sealed in the dark behind them, kept not because they were too weak to wield it, but because they were strong enough not to want to. Dumbledore came twice more in the following week, and Andromeda came every day, and between them the two children of the House of Black were schooled, fast, hard, and barely in time, in the world they were about to walk into. Andromeda taught them the old houses, who hated whom and why, which families would smell the crowns as opportunity and which as insult, how to address a Selwyn and how to insult a Knot without seeming to, and how to sit at a table full of people who wanted you dead and eat as though you had not noticed. "You are children," she told them flatly on the third day, "and they will use that, and you cannot stop them using it, so you will turn it. A child who behaves like a frightened child confirms everything they say. A child who behaves like a sovereign, calm, courteous, utterly unmoved, never raising the voice, never showing the fear, terrifies them, because it means the thing they cannot explain away is real. You will not win by seeming older than you are. You will win by being more certain than they are. The certainty is the whole of it. The house chose you. Wear that like armor and let them break themselves against it." Dumbledore taught them the Wisengamot, the procedure of it, the traps in it, the patient grinding machinery of wizarding law that Lucius Malfoy was even now, they knew, oiling and turning against them. "He will not challenge you with strength," the headmaster said. He is far too clever for that. He will challenge you with process. He will find a rule, an old true rule, and he will use it to demand a thing that sounds reasonable and is fatal, a review, an audit, a hearing, a regency, pending determination. And the danger of process is that it is slow and patient, and it does not look like an attack, and by the time you understand you are losing, you have already lost. You must not let him choose the ground. You must force the matter onto ground of your own, somewhere the Wisengamot's slow machinery does not run, somewhere the house's own ancient law is supreme. He looked at them over his half-moon glasses. I suspect you already hold such ground and do not yet know it. The choosing of the quick is not the only old right sleeping in that house. When the moment comes that Lucius Malfoy thinks he has trapped you in the Wisengamot's machinery, and it will come, I would look very hard, if I were you, at what older machinery you might invoke to take the matter out of his hands entirely. Hermione, who had been quiet through this, looked up sharply, and Harry felt the click of it land through the thread, the sound of her mind catching a thread and beginning already to pull. A trial of right, she said slowly. There's a thing in the loom, I've felt the edge of it, an ancient ordeal, not a Wisengamot trial, a house trial. The core atrum itself judges whether a claimant has the right to the seat. It hasn't been invoked in centuries because there's been no contest worth invoking it for. But if someone challenged our right, if Malfoy or the others tried to take the seat by the Wisengamot's law, we could answer by demanding the House judge it instead. Take it out of their machinery and into ours, onto ground where the core atrum is supreme and the Wisengamot has no standing at all. She looked at Dumbledore and then at Harry, and the old fierce light was in her face. We could make them prove it the House's way, and the House already chose us. We'd win before we started. You would, Dumbledore agreed, and there was something almost like pride in the old man's voice and something almost like worry under it. If, and it is a very great if, the House's judgment is one you can survive. The old ordeals were not gentle. The Blacks did not build a trial of right to be passed easily. But yes, Lady Black, that is exactly the kind of ground I meant. Hold it ready. You may need it sooner than you think. He was right about that, as he was right about most things, and gentle in the way he was right, which was to say not gentle at all, because the very next morning, before the breakfast plates were cleared, the owls came. Not one owl, a dozen. A dozen heavy cream envelopes sealed in a dozen ancient crests, descending on Grimmauld Place all at once like a flock of well-bred vultures, and Harry opened the first and read it and felt his temper start its dangerous climb and felt, instantly, Hermione's weight land steady in his chest. It was from the House of Selwyn. It was scrupulously courteous. And it informed the occupants of number 12, Grimmauld Place, that a coalition of the ancient and noble houses, Selwyn, Knott, Parkinson, Yaxley, and others, had jointly petitioned the Wisengamot to review the alleged and irregular headship of the House of Black, and that the children currently in residence were summoned to answer the petition before the full Wisengamot in 1 week's time, and that their failure to appear would be taken as forfeit of any claim to the seat. The aristocracy had stopped writing polite letters one at a time. The aristocracy had formed up and declared and moved. 1 week, Hermione said, very calm, setting the letter down. Through the thread Harry felt her cold come up like a tide, vast and steady and unafraid, the break in the judgment and the law of the House of Black gathering itself for war. All right, then we have 1 week to be ready. Andromeda, we're going to need to know every single one of those houses, every debt they owe us, every secret in the loom that touches them. Harry, she turned to him, and she was smiling, and it was not a kind smile, and Harry loved her for it. We're not going to answer their petition. We're going to answer it with ours. They want to drag us into the Wisengamot's machinery. So we let them get us there in front of everyone with the whole aristocracy watching, and then we invoke the trial of right, and we take it out of their hands entirely, and we make the House itself judge whether 2 children have the right to its throne. The smile sharpened, and the House already decided, they just don't know it yet. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The Aristocracy Resists. The Sable Court did not wait the full week to take its first shot. It came on the 3rd day in person, and its name was Corvus Yaxley. Harry felt him arrive the way the wards felt him, as a cold. Not the deep, clean cold of the core atrum, which Harry had come to think of almost as the House's pulse, but a thin, surgical cold, a cold with an edge, and the House's attention turned toward the front door with a wariness that was new. When Creature came to announce the visitor, his ears were flat to his skull. A wizard at the door, my lord, of the old blood. He gives the name Yaxley and asks the ladies' leave to enter. The elf's voice dropped. Creature does not like him. The wards do not like him. He smells of the cabal that means to take the house. Then we'll see him in the drawing room, Hermione said before Harry could answer, and Harry felt the calculation in it through the thread. Better to meet the blade once on our ground than to wonder about it. And Creature, bring tea, the good service. We are going to be unbearably gracious to this man. Corvus Yaxley came into the drawing room of the House of Black like a knife laid on velvet. He was tall and spare and gray, not old but bloodless, with pale eyes set close and a stillness about him that was the stillness of a thing waiting to strike. He wore black robes without ornament, a deliberate austerity. Andromeda had warned them about this, the old families who advertised their power by needing none, and he bowed exactly to neither too low nor too high. The bow one gives a claimant whose claim one intends to destroy. Lord Black, he said, Lady Black, a pause on the second title, almost too small to catch, a pause that said we both know that word is a lie without the discourtesy of saying it. You are gracious to receive me. I am Corvus Yaxley. I speak in this matter for a number of houses that find themselves troubled. Sit, Mr. Yaxley, said Hermione, with a warmth so perfect it could have frozen water. We've been hoping the houses would send someone we could actually talk to. Letters are so slow. Harry watched the man's pale eyes flick to her, recalculating. He had come expecting frightened children or angry children or impostors who would overplay. He had not come expecting a 13-year-old to seat him like a hostess and disarm him with hospitality, and the small recalibration in his face was the first point scored, and Harry felt Hermione feel it, a flicker of cold satisfaction down the thread. Yaxley sat. He took tea, because to refuse it would have been to concede that the meeting was war, and he was not yet ready to concede that openly. And then over the good service, in a voice as level and gray as winter water, he laid out the destruction of the House of Black. I will be plain, he said, because you are children, and plainness is a courtesy children are owed. There is no malice in what the houses intend, there is only order. The magical world is held together by certain things being true, that a noble house is led by a wizard of age and standing, that the headship of an ancient line is not a thing that can be conjured overnight, that power follows blood and law and not the whim of an old enchantment in a cellar. You have between you made all of those things untrue in a single night. You understand that this cannot be permitted to stand, not because of who you are, but because of what it would mean if it did. If the magic of a house can simply choose a child, a half-blood, forgive me, a muggle born, and set aside 1,000 years of law to do it, then no house is safe, no inheritance is certain, no order holds. We do not move against you, we move to restore the thing your crowning broke. He set down his cup. The Wisengamot will hear the petition in 4 days. The houses will ask for a regency, a guardian of standing to hold the seat until its rightful disposition can be determined by law. Will not win, I do not say that to frighten you. I say it because it is arithmetic. The votes are counted. The only question that remains is whether you will yield gracefully and keep the goodwill of the houses and perhaps a portion of the estate, or whether you will fight and lose and be remembered as the children who let an old enchantment make fools of them. He spread his pale hands. I have come to offer you the graceful path. It will not be offered twice. It was, Harry thought, a genuinely good move. There was no anger in it to push against, no insult to seize on, no lie to expose. The man had simply walked in and told them the truth, that the world's order was on his side, that the votes were counted, that they were children playing at a game grown men had spent careers learning, and offered them a soft place to fall. Harry felt his own helplessness rise, and under it his temper, and he reached for the voice without meaning to, and felt Hermione's weight land in him, steady and held. It was Hermione who answered. She had been silent through the whole of it, her chin propped on one hand, listening with the absolute attention she gave a difficult book, and when Yaxley finished she did not argue with him. That was the thing that undid him, Harry understood later, watching it. She did not argue, she agreed. You're right, she said, about almost all of it. The crowning did break your order. The magic of a house did set aside 1,000 years of law to choose 2 children. And if the Wisengamot hears your petition as a petition about law, about inheritance and standing and the rules of the houses, you'll win, because you're right that the law is on your side and the votes are counted and we're children. She lifted her chin off her hand. So we're not going to let the Wisengamot hear it as a petition about law. A flicker in the pale eyes, the first true flicker. I beg your pardon. You said it yourself, Mr. Yaxley, power follows blood and law, not the whim of an old enchantment. But that's not quite true, is it? It used to be true. Before the statute, before the Wisengamot, before the ministry existed at all, the old houses governed themselves by older law, by right, by ordeal, by the judgment of their own magic, and those rights were never repealed. They were just forgotten because nobody needed them, because there was never a contest old enough or strange enough to be worth waking them for. She smiled at him, and it was the smile Harry had seen her turn on the green door, the smile of a problem revealing its shape. There's a right in the law of the House of Black called the trial of right. When the headship of the house is contested, the claimant may demand that the contest be judged not by men but by the house itself, by the core atrum, the heart of the family magic. It takes the matter entirely out of the Wisengamot's hands. The Wisengamot has no standing to rule on a contest that has been referred to the house's own ancient law. That's settled. It's in the Treaty of 1547, you can look it up. And the judgment of the house is final and binding on every house in Britain, because every house in Britain governs itself by the same old law and can't deny ours without denying its own. She let that land. So here's what is going to happen, Mr. Yaxley. We are going to appear before the Wisengamot in 4 days, exactly as you've summoned us. We're not going to fight your petition. We're going to grant it. We're going to agree that our right should be tested. And then in front of the full Wisengamot in every house in Britain, we are going to invoke the trial of right and refer the whole question to the House's own judgment, where your counted votes mean precisely nothing. And the House, her voice did not rise. It went, if anything, quieter, and the quiet was worse. Already chose us, Mr. Yaxley. It will not unchoose us to please a cabal of frightened old families. You've come to offer us a graceful surrender. I'm afraid we're going to have to decline and offer you a fair trial instead. I do hope the Houses are as fond of old law as they say they are. They're about to be held to a great deal of it. The silence that followed had a texture. Harry could feel Yaxley's mind working behind the bloodless face, fast, cold, genuinely formidable, running the same arithmetic he had walked in so certain of and finding, for the first time, a term in it he had not counted. Because Hermione was right, and a man like Yaxley knew the old law well enough to know she was right, and the trial of right was a thing the cabal could not refuse without exposing the lie at the heart of their whole petition, that they cared for the old order. They could not invoke the sanctity of ancient law to attack the children, and then deny ancient law when the children invoked it back. He had come to checkmate 2 children, and a 13-year-old had just offered to play him on a board he could not refuse and could not win. That is a clever argument, Yaxley said at last, and the gray voice had changed, had gone very slightly flat, the flatness of a man revising every estimate he had made on the walk to the door. Cleverer than I was led to expect. You have read the old law more carefully than the Houses that have lived by it for 1,000 years. He stood and set the bow he gave them this time a degree lower than the one he had come in with, not respect, Harry understood, but reassessment. The bow one gives a real opponent. I will carry your answer to the Houses. They will not like it, but you are correct that they cannot refuse it without unmaking themselves. Paused at the door and turned, and the close-set pale eyes settled on Hermione with an attention that was no longer dismissive at all, that had become instead something colder and far more dangerous, the attention a swordsman gives the one opponent in the room who might actually be able to kill him. You should understand one thing, Lady Black, before you choose this ground. The trial of right is not a vote, and it is not a debate, and it cannot be won with a clever reading of treaties. It is an ordeal. The House tests the claimant body, mind, and magic, and the old Houses did not build their ordeals to be survived by children. You have found a way onto ground where my votes do not count, but you have chosen to do it, the one ground where being 13 years old may matter a very great deal more than being right. He inclined his head. I will see you at the trial. I almost find myself hoping you live to begin it. And he was gone out into the grey London afternoon, leaving the cold of him hanging in the drawing-room like a blade laid down on velvet, and Harry let out the breath he had been holding and turned to find Hermione very pale and very still, the bravado gone out of her the instant the door closed, the cost of what she had just done settling onto her. He's right, she said quietly. I read the law, I didn't read the ordeal. I don't actually know what the trial of right does to claimant, Harry. I know it exists, and I know it takes the matter out of the Wisengamot's hands, and I know the House chose us, but I don't know if we can survive it. I just bet our entire claim in front of the man who wants us dead on a thing I don't fully understand. She looked at him, and the fear was bare in her face, the fear she never let strangers see. I think I just talked us into something that could kill us. Harry crossed the room and sat down beside her, and through the thread he sent her the thing she had sent him 100 times, the steadiness, the we'll work it out, his half of the seat answering hers. Then we've got 4 days to understand it, he said. And we're not doing it alone. We've got Dumbledore and Andromeda and the whole library and the House itself, and the House wants us to pass. It chose us. It's not going to make the trial something we can't survive together. He took her hand. You didn't bet us on a thing you don't understand. You bet us on a thing we're about to understand. There's a difference. And it was the right move, Hermione. You took the one ground where his votes don't count. Now we make sure the ground holds. She let out a breath that shook and squeezed his hand and nodded, and Harry felt her gather herself back up out of the fear, and that the gathering, the refusal to stay afraid, was the bravest thing he ever saw her do, braver than any of the magic, and he never once told her so because she would not have believed him. And so he simply held her hand and let her find her feet, which was, he was learning, his actual job. They spent the 4 days learning the trial of right, and what they learned frightened them and then slowly armed them. It lived in the deepest law of the House, in a stratum of the loom that Hermione had to descend to like a diver going down past the light, and it was old past the reach of any record Dumbledore could supply, older than the Wisengamot, older than the statute, a thing the very first Blacks had built when the family was young, and the core Attram knew bound beneath the House. It was, as Yaxley had said, an ordeal. The House would judge a contested claimant by testing the 3 things the Blacks had believed a ruler must possess, and it would test them not in theory but in fact, in flesh and mind and magic, and it would not pretend the testing was safe. 3 proofs, Hermione said, on the second night, surfacing from the loom gray-faced and triumphant, the way she always looked when she had wrestled a terrible thing into the light. She had it written out, the whole structure of it, in her cramped, fast hand. The house tests three things: the proof of blood, though it's not really about blood, that's the old name for it. It's the proof of right, the test of whether the claimant truly holds the bond to the core atrum or merely claims it. That one we pass easily because we genuinely do. The house will feel its own crowns on us and know. The proof of mastery, whether the claimant can actually wield the powers of the seat, the voice and the loom under pressure against resistance. That one's harder, but we've been training for exactly that for a month. And the third, she stopped. The third, Harry prompted, the proof of worth. She looked down at her notes. And I can't read it, Harry, that's the thing. The first two proofs are written out, the house tells you what they test and how. The third one is. All the loom says about the proof of worth is that the house judges the claimant's fitness to rule, their character, their will, the thing they'd actually do with the power, and that it tests it by showing the claimant a truth about themselves they would rather not face, and judging what they do with it. That's all, no specifics, because it can't be specific, it's different for every claimant. The house reaches into you and finds the thing you're most afraid is true about yourself, and it makes you face it, and it watches what you do. She set the notes down. We can't prepare for that one, there's nothing to study. It's going to find whatever each of us is most afraid of and put it in front of us, and we'll be alone with it, and there's no book that can get us through that. Harry was quiet for a while. He thought about the cupboard. He thought about the thing he had been most afraid was true about himself for as long as he could remember, that he was nothing, that the Dursleys had been right, that the reason no one had ever come for him was that there was nothing in him worth coming for, that the crowns and the prophecy and the scar were all accidents that had landed on an empty boy. He thought that the house, reaching into him, would find that and put it in front of him, and he did not know what he would do. Maybe that's the point, though, he said slowly, that we can't prepare. Yaxley's whole world is preparation, counted votes, read treaties, arithmetic. Everything he does is about controlling the outcome before it happens. And the proof of worth is the one test you can't control, can't study for, can't game. You just have to be whatever you actually are when the house looks. He found Hermione's eyes. The heart chose us because of what we are, not what we know. It said so in the gallery. It wanted the boy who covets nothing and the girl whose belonging no one ever granted. It already looked into us, Hermione. The proof of worth isn't a stranger reaching in. It's the house checking that the thing it already saw is really there. He almost smiled, which means the way to pass it isn't to prepare. It's to trust that the heart was right about us, which honestly terrifies me more than anything Yaxley said. It terrifies me too, Hermione said. And then after a moment quietly, but it'll find us together, won't it? Whatever it shows me, you'll feel it through the thread, and whatever it shows you, I'll feel it. She looked at the link between them as though she could see it, which perhaps in the loom she could. Even in the part we have to face alone, we won't actually be alone. That's. She stopped and chose not to finish, and Harry chose not to make her. That's the whole thing, he said for her. Yeah. In a paneled room in Malfoy Manor, 3 days before the Wisengamot, the Sable Court took the measure of its own fracture, and Lucius Malfoy learned that he had a problem inside his own coalition that was larger than the children. They gathered after dark, the houses that had signed the petition, Selwyn and Knott and Parkinson, with Yaxley grey and silent at the foot of the table and Lucius at its head, and the meeting did not go as Lucius had planned, because Yaxley had returned from Grimmauld Place changed, and the change frightened the others more than any defeat. They will invoke the trial of right, Yaxley said without preamble, the moment the doors were sealed. The Granger girl read it out to me across my own teacup. She knows the law better than any of us. The petition is finished, they will grant it and refer the matter to the House's own judgment, and there is nothing in our counted votes that touches a trial of right. I have come to tell you the strategy is dead, and to ask what we mean to do about a thing none of us anticipated, that the Muggle-born child is the most dangerous lawyer in Britain, and she is 13. The room did not like that. The Parkinson matriarch said something sharp about not being lectured on the law by a child or by the man a child had outwitted, and the Knott patriarch wanted to know why Yaxley had not simply destroyed the children where they stood, and Lucius watched his coalition begin to turn on itself and understood, with the cold clarity that was his one real gift, that this was the actual danger, not the children. But what the children's mere existence did to a coalition of proud men who had never before been made to feel afraid. We do not panic, Lucius said in his smooth, grave voice, and the room quieted because Lucius was the one among them who never lost his composure, and they had learned to be reassured by it. Yaxley is right that the legal strategy is dead. He is right that the girl is formidable. He is wrong that this is a catastrophe. It is an opportunity if we have the wit to take it. He turned his silver-headed cane in his hands. They will demand the trial of right. Very well, we will grant it gladly, publicly, generously. And we will demand only one thing in return, that the trial be held in full by the old measure, without mercy, without abatement for their years. Because Yaxley, who has read the old law as deeply as the girl, will tell you what she has only just discovered, that the trial of right was never built to be survived by children, and that its final proof reaches into a claimant and finds the thing they are most afraid of and makes them face it alone. His pale gaze moved around the table. We need not lift a hand against them. We need only insist on fairness, on the children being tested exactly as any claimant would be tested, and let the house do to them what we are too squeamish to do ourselves. If the magic truly chose them, they pass and we lose, and we are no worse off than we are now. If it did not, if there is anything hollow or weak or frightened in either of them, as there is in all children, then the house finds it and breaks them, and the breaking is the house's doing and not ours. We keep our hands clean. We keep the moral high ground, and we let the oldest magic in Britain do the work we cannot. It was, the room agreed, a good plan, better than the dead one, cleaner, with the rare elegance of a trap that the victim springs upon themselves while believing they have chosen the ground. And Lucius let them believe it was the whole plan, because Lucius Malfoy never had only one plan, and the second one, the one he did not speak aloud, the one that involved a certain green door at the end of a certain gallery and a letter already written, already sent by an owl that did not fly to anyone in this room, was not a thing he intended to share with a coalition he did not trust and would discard the moment it stopped being useful. Only Yaxley, watching the head of the table with his cold gray patience, seemed to understand that Lucius had not told them everything, and Yaxley said nothing, because Yaxley had a second page of his own arithmetic, and a man who keeps secrets recognizes the keeping of secrets in another. The two most dangerous men in the sable court looked at each other down the length of the table, each aware that the other was not finished, neither willing to be the first to show his hand, and the coalition broke up into the dark, believing it had a single clever plan when in truth it had three, and they did not all point the same way, and that more than the children, more than the law, more than the trial of right, was the thing that would, in the end, undo the houses. That they could not even conspire without conspiring against each other. The morning of the Wisengamot, the houses overplayed their hand, and it was Lucius Malfoy who did it. He had been silent since his first letter. Harry realized, content to let Yaxley be the blade and the coalition be the weight, keeping his own hands clean, the husband of the nearest blood standing nobly back from the unseemliness of it all. But on the morning of the hearing he could not resist, and the not resisting was the first crack Harry saw in the smooth surface of the enemy, the first sign that the cabal was not a single will, but a collection of appetites that did not entirely trust one another. Malfoy intercepted them in the marble antechamber outside the Wisengamot's high doors, Harry and Hermione in the formal black the house had provided, crowns dimmed but present, Andromeda a pace behind them as their sponsor of blood, Dumbledore meeting them at the doors as their warrant of standing. Lucius came across the marble in robes of dove-gray silk, silver-headed cane in hand, Narcissa on his arm, and that was the thing Harry's eye caught and held, because Narcissa Malfoy, born black, walked beside her husband with her chin high and her face a mask of pureblood disdain, and her eyes, when they passed over the two children, were not disdainful at all. They were searching, hungry almost, the eyes of a woman looking at a thing she had been told to despise and finding instead that she could not look away. "Children," Lucius said, and the word was an insult dressed as a kindness. "I had hoped to find you wiser than your letters, to bring an old enchantment's mistake into the open halls of the Wisengamot, to make the whole of magical Britain witness to two muddled children's delusion. It is unkind, you know, to yourselves. There is still a graceful path. My wife is the nearest blood of your house. She would make a fit and gentle regent. The estate would be preserved, your dignity with it. You need only stand down," he smiled, and it did not reach his pale eyes. "Surely the Muggle-born at least can do the arithmetic. You have no friends in that room, Lady Black. Not one of the noble houses will speak for you. You walk in there alone." "She doesn't walk in alone," Harry said. "She walks in with me." "And with the House of Black," said Andromeda, stepping forward, and Harry saw Lucius's smooth face tighten at the sight of her. Andromeda, the cousin struck from the cloth, restored, standing as sponsor of the very house that had cast her out. "And with its lord and its lady and its magic, Lucius. You should know better than most what it means that the house reinstated me. It does not do that for the losing side." But it was Narcissa who undid Lucius's gambit, and she did it without saying a word against him, which was the most interesting thing Harry had yet seen. As Lucius drew breath to press the point, his wife's gloved hand tightened on his arm, a small pressure, a wife's signal, and she spoke for the first time, her voice cool and aristocratic and giving away nothing, addressed not to Harry but to Hermione. "You reinstated my sister Andromeda," Narcissa said. "Restored her to the family that burned her off the cloth. I should like to know why." It was not a friendly question, but it was not a hostile one either, and Harry felt the dangerous delicacy of it through the thread, felt Hermione understand instantly that the answer she gave the next 10 seconds mattered more than anything she would say inside the Wisengamot, because Narcissa Black was the nearest free blood of the house, and the one person in the enemy's camp whose loyalty was not yet counted. "Because the house hurt her for marrying outside the blood," Hermione said simply, "for loving the wrong person by the family's lights, and we decided that the first thing we'd do with the house was undo a piece of its cruelty instead of adding to it." She held Narcissa's eyes. "Your husband wants you made regent so the seat passes to your son. I understand that, but I want you to know what kind of house you'd be regent of, Mrs. Malfoy. It's It's not the house that burned your sister off the tapestry. It's a house that called her home. Whatever you decide to do today, I wanted you to know that the door's open. The family doesn't burn its own off the cloth anymore, not while we hold it. Something happened in Narcissa Malfoy's beautiful cold face, something fast and buried instantly, a thing that might have been longing and might have been calculation and was, Harry suspected, both at once. She had been a girl when the family burned Andromeda off the tapestry. She had watched her sister cast out for love and her other sister give herself to madness, and she had chosen the safe path between them, the pure marriage, the right blood, and she had spent 30 years being correct, and a muggle-born child had just stood in a marble antechamber and offered her, of all things, her sister back. I will hear the trial, Narcissa said, which was nothing, which committed her to nothing, and which was, Harry felt Hermione understand it, everything, because it was not I support my husband's petition, and Lucius heard the absence of those words too, and his smooth face went, for half a heartbeat, very still. Narcissa, he said low. I said I will hear it, his wife repeated, and turned her cool gaze on the high doors of the Wisengamot and would say no more, and Harry felt the first hairline fracture run through the enemy's wall, and knew that the cabal that had seemed a single counted thing was in fact a collection of separate hungers, and that hungers could be turned. The high doors opened. The Wisengamot waited beyond them, 500 witches and wizards in plum-colored robes, the whole assembled weight of magical Britain's law, summoned to watch two children answer for the crime of being chosen. Dumbledore offered his arm gravely and Andromeda fell in behind, and Harry looked at Hermione one last time in the marble antechamber, and through the thread, under the fear, under the cold, he felt her certainty, battered, frightened, and absolutely unbroken. Ready, he said. No, said Hermione, and smiled, and lifted her chin, and let her crown rise to its full burning being on her brow, where 500 enemies could see it. Let's go anyway. And the lord and lady of the most ancient and noble house of Black walked into the Wisengamot together to demand the right to be judged. The chamber of the Wisengamot was built to make the small feel smaller. It was a deep stone amphitheater, tier upon tier of plum-robed witches and wizards rising into shadow, and at its floor a single space of cold flagstones where the summoned were made to stand and be looked down upon by all of magical Britain at once. Harry had braced for the size of it. He had not braced for the silence, for the way 500 people went quiet together when two children walked out onto the floor with crowns burning on their brows. A silence not of respect but of appetite, the hush of a crowd that has come to watch something fall. Dumbledore took his place among the high seats as Chief Warlock, which meant he could not stand for them on the floor, could only preside, scrupulously neutral, over the destruction the houses had come to perform, and Harry understood the loneliness of the flagstones then, the deliberate engineering of it. They had been placed where no friend could stand beside them but each other. Each other was enough. The petition was read by a clerk in a flat official drone, the joint plea of the houses Selwyn, Knott, Parkinson, Yaxley, Flint, and others, that the alleged and irregular headship conferred upon two minors by an enchantment of uncertain provenance be suspended, and a regent of standing appointed to hold the seat of the House of Black until its lawful disposition be determined. It was, on the page, reasonable. That was the whole craft of it. It asked only for caution, for review, for the sensible interim of a grown guardian, and behind the reasonable words stood the counted votes, and the counted votes meant that the sensible interim would last until the children were grown and the estate dismembered, and the seat handed quietly to a Malfoy son. Lucius rose to speak to it, dove-grey and grave, and he spoke beautifully, of order, of precedent, of the danger to every house in Britain if the magic of a single family could overturn 1,000 years of law on a whim. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He had the room, and he knew it, and he was building brick by courteous brick, the unanswerable case that the only safe thing, the only responsible thing, was to take the seat gently from two confused children for their own protection and the protection of all. When he finished, the silence had weight. It was the silence of a verdict already reached. The Chief Warlock's voice, when it came, was carefully without color. The House may answer the petition. Lord Black, Lady Black, do you contest it? Harry felt every eye in the amphitheater come down on them, 500-fold, and felt his temper want to rise to meet it, and felt Hermione's weight, and then, more than the weight, felt her step forward half a pace, claiming the floor because this was law and law was hers. We don't contest it, Hermione said. The word went through the chamber like a dropped glass. Lucius's head came up. Yaxley, grey and still in the Yaxley seat, went absolutely motionless. A muggle-born child had stood on the cold flagstones of the Wisengamot and conceded, and for one heartbeat the whole hostile room did not understand that it had just been led onto a cliff. We don't contest that our rights should be tested, Hermione went on, and her voice, though it did not rise, carried to the highest shadowed tier, because the chamber had been built to carry the voice of whoever held its floor, and she held it now. Lord Malfoy is right that an extraordinary thing has happened, and that extraordinary things should be examined and not merely accepted. We agree, we welcome it. We came here today not to deny that our right should be proven, but to choose how. She turned slowly, taking in the tears, and Harry watched her do the thing Andromeda had taught them, not seeming older than she was, but more certain than anyone in the room, the certainty of a person standing on ground she has measured to the inch. The petition asks the Wisengamot to rule on the headship of an ancient house, but the Wisengamot has no power to rule on it, it never has. The disposition of a contested headship of a most ancient and noble house is reserved, by the Treaty of 1547, to which every house in this chamber is a signatory, to the ancient law of the house itself. When the right to such a seat is contested, the claimant may invoke the trial of right and refer the contest to the judgment of the house's own magic, and that judgment is sovereign and final and binding upon every house in Britain, including, and here, for the first and only time, her voice sharpened and the sharpness cut, including the houses that petition to bring us here today, who cannot invoke the sanctity of ancient law to attack two children, and then deny that same ancient law when the children invoke it in their own defense. The chamber erupted. It was not a riot, the Wisengamot did not riot, but it was 100 voices breaking out at once, a surge of consternation rolling up the tears, plum-robed elders turning to one another, and through it Harry watched the enemy's face change. He watched Lucius Malfoy understand in real time that the soft and certain victory he had walked in holding had just been taken out of his hands, that the votes he had counted were worth nothing in a trial of right, that the children had refused the battle he had chosen and offered one he could not refuse, because to refuse the trial of right was to deny the very ancient law the whole petition pretended to defend. And he watched Yaxley alone in all that uproar, not move at all, the gray man sitting still in the storm, pale eyes fixed on Hermione, recalculating, and beneath the recalculation something that was almost terribly satisfaction, the satisfaction of a hunter who has just watched the quarry choose the one path that leads into his trap. "Order," said Dumbledore, and the chamber stilled, and the chief warlock looked down at the two children on the flagstones with a face that gave nothing away and eyes that gave away everything, the pride, and the fear, and the helpless old grief of a man who could not protect them and had just watched them refuse to be protected. The Lady of the House of Black invokes the trial of right. The chair finds the invocation lawful. By the Treaty of 1547, the contest of the headship is hereby referred from this body to the judgment of the house's own magic, and this body's jurisdiction is, in the matter, suspended. A pause. The petitioning houses may speak to the form of the trial, and Yaxley rose. He rose slowly into a chamber that had gone quiet to hear him, and he did not look at the Wisengamot. He looked at Hermione, and he spoke to her, across the cold floor, in the gray level voice that had laid out their destruction over the good tea service 3 days before. "The houses accept the trial of right," Corvus Yaxley said, "as the claimants knew we must, for the lady reads our law more faithfully than we keep it." A murmur at that, an old enemy granting a point was its own small violence. "We accept it gladly. For the trial of right is no debate and no vote and no clever reading of treaties, and the claimants have, in their cleverness, walked off the one ground where their cleverness could save them and onto the one ground where it cannot. The house will test them, body, mind, and magic, by ordeals the old families built, and the claimants have never seen and cannot study. And the houses ask only this of the form, that the trial be held in full by the old measure, without mercy and without abatement for the claimants' years." The pale eyes did not blink. "They have demanded to be judged as lord and lady of an ancient house. Let them be judged as one. Let the house test them as it would test any claimant to its throne, to the utmost and to the edge, and beyond it if the house so wills. We will not have it said that the seat was won by children the house went gentle on. Either the magic of the House of Black truly chose them, in which case they will pass and we will bend the knee and the matter will be closed forever, or it did not, in which case the trial will find them wanting and the truth will out and no clever treaty will save them from it." He inclined his head to the chair and then last to the two children, "The assessor's bow, the bow one gives a worthy thing one means to destroy. The houses ask for the trial in full, nothing less, nothing softened. Let the house decide." It was, Harry understood, the trap inside the trap. Yaxley had not fought the trial of right. He had embraced it because he had read the same deep law Hermione had, and he knew what she had only just learned, that the Blacks had not built their ordeals to be survived by children, that the proof of worth reached into a claimant and found the thing they were most afraid was true and made them face it alone. He had let them walk onto the one ground where being 13 years old might kill them, and now he was demanding, in the name of fairness, that the ground be made as deadly as the old law allowed. He had turned their own move into a blade and handed it back to them, edge first. "The house accepts," Hermione said, before Dumbledore could rule, before Lucius could object, before the trap could be sprung by anyone's hand but her own, because she had seen it too. Harry felt it land through the thread, the cold recognition of exactly what Yaxley had done, and she had decided in the same instant that the only answer to a trap you cannot avoid is to walk into it of your own free will, so that at least it is yours. We accept the trial in full, by the old measure, without abatement. Let the house test us to the utmost, body, mind, and magic, and let the whole of Britain witness the judgment, so that when we pass, no man in this chamber can ever again say the seat was given to us softly. She turned from Yaxley to the tears and lifted her chin, and the crown of the lady of the House of Black burned on her brow before 500 enemies, and she was 13 years old and entirely unafraid, or perfectly able to seem so, which in that chamber amounted to the same thing. We did not ask to be chosen, but we were, and we will prove it on any ground you name, by any measure you set, to the edge of whatever the House demands. Set the trial, we will be there. The chief warlock struck the rail. The trial of right is set, Albus Dumbledore said, and only Harry, attuned now to every weather of the old man's voice, heard the dread beneath the formula. It will be held at the seat of the House of Black, before witnesses of every house, at the dark of the coming moon. The House will judge, the judgment will be sovereign and final. This body is adjourned. 500 plum-robed witches and wizards rose in a rustle like a great wind through dead leaves, and filed out into the corridors of power to spread the word that 2 children had refused to be saved and demanded instead to be tried to the edge of death by the oldest magic in Britain. And on the cold flagstones of the empty chamber Harry and Hermione stood alone at last, side by side, crowned, having won the only thing they had come to win, the right to be judged, and having paid for it, Harry understood. Watching Yaxley's grey back vanish through the high doors, a price they would not finish counting until the dark of the moon. 3 days, Hermione said quietly. 3 days, Harry agreed, and he took her hand on the cold stone where all of Britain had come to watch them fall, and felt through the thread that whatever the house found in each of them when it reached in, they would not face it as far apart as Yaxley believed. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The first trial they came to watch 2 children die, and they dressed for it. On the dark of the moon, the witnesses of the houses arrived at Grimmauld Place in their formal mourning black, because the old families had decided among themselves that the trial of right was, in all likelihood, a funeral, and the proper thing was to be seen grieving in advance. They came through the front door, one house at a time, announced by Creature in his stiff new pillowcase, and the house admitted them down into a part of itself Harry had never seen, a vast circular chamber far below the gallery of the dead, a stone amphitheater of black benches ringing a central floor of bare flagstone, and at the floor's heart, risen up out of the deep, the core atrium itself, the heart of the House of Black, shining its impossible black light over the faces of the people who had come to see it judge. Harry stood with Hermione at the chamber's edge and watched the enemy file in, and felt through the thread the steady cold of her fear matched against the steady heat of his own, the 2 of them holding each other up before a single word had been spoken. Lucius Malfoy came in dove grey, which was its own statement, not mourning, confidence, a man who did not believe he would need to grieve. Narcissa beside him in black. The Selwyn elder, the Knot patriarch, the Parkinson matriarch with her hard bright eyes. And last, alone in the unornamented black he always wore, Corvus Yaxley, who did not look at the benches or the witnesses or the gathering weight of the houses, but came to the edge of the central floor and stood there looking at the core atrium with an expression Harry could not read, and then turned deliberately and found Harry and Hermione across the chamber, and inclined his head to them, the assessor's bow, the bow before the kill. And Harry understood that the man had come not to watch them die, but to make certain of it, and that whatever Yaxley had done in the 3 days since the Wisengamot, it was not nothing. Dumbledore came as witness and warrant both, and Andromeda as sponsor of blood, and behind them, to Harry's surprise, a young woman with fiercely pink hair and an Auror's wary stance, Tonks, who had no standing in any of this and had come anyway because, she had told Harry the night before, somebody in this family ought to be on your side who can actually throw a curse. They took their places at the witnesses' rail, the 3 of them, the whole of the children's allies in all the world, a handful against the assembled black weight of the houses, and the chamber filled, and the doors sealed, and the core atrium's light steadied, and the trial of right began. It began with the heart speaking not to the children but to the chamber in the admitted meaning that was its only voice, so that every witch and wizard on the black benches understood at once in their own minds the law under which they had gathered. The headship of the House of Black is contested. 2 claimants hold the crowns. The houses dispute their right. By the old law the House will judge. There will be 3 proofs of right, of mastery, of worth. The claimants will pass all 3, or they will pass none. The judgment will be sovereign and final and binding upon every house here gathered, and there will be no appeal from it, in this world or out of it. Begin. The proof of right came first, and it was the swiftest, and the witnesses had been told to expect it to be the children's best chance and were waiting, Harry understood, to see how the houses had arranged for it to go wrong. The heart simply looked at them. That was the proof, the house reaching out to feel for its own crowns, to know whether the magic on the claimants' brows was the genuine bond of the core atrium or some counterfeit cleverly worn, and there was no way to fake it and no way to fail it if it was true. And Harry felt the great cold attention pass over him and find the crown and know it, and pass to Hermione and find hers and know it too. and the heart spoke a single admitted word into the chamber, true, and that should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it because Lucius Malfoy rose. The bond is true, he said, smooth and grave, addressing not the heart but the benches, the witnesses, the court of the houses. No one disputes that the magic chose these children. We dispute only that the magic had the right. The core atrum is old, my friends, and old things decay, and a decayed enchantment may bind itself to whatever is nearest in its dying, a child, a beast, a stone. That the house chose them proves only that the house is dying. It does not prove that the choosing is sound. I move that the proof of right be held insufficient, and that the houses recall that a mad king's word is still a mad king's word, however true the crown upon his head. He spread his hands to the benches, and Harry watched the cleverness of it land, the houses murmuring, nodding, because it was a real argument, because the house was dying, because the whole strangeness of the choosing of the quick could be read exactly that way, as the last delirium of a failing magic. And the heart of the House of Black, which did not often deign to answer the speech of men, answered Lucius Malfoy. It answered him by showing the chamber what it had shown Harry and Hermione in the gallery on the first night, the whole long catalogue of the house's grief, the 1,000 years of pride and purity and cruelty, the burnings off and the disownments, the thinning blood and the curdling line, and then the choosing, deliberate and clear-eyed and entirely sane. The house weighing every living will within its reach and choosing, not in delirium, but in judgment, the two it found most fit. I am dying, the heart admitted into the chamber, into the mind of every witness on the benches, and the admission was so vast and so undefended that the murmuring stopped. I am dying because for 1,000 years my family chose by blood, and blood failed me and brought me to ruin. I did not bind myself to the nearest thing in my dying. I reached with the last of my strength past my own failing blood, and I chose, deliberately, the boy who covets nothing, the girl whose worth no one would grant. I chose them because they are fit and because my blood was not, and if that is the madness of a dying king, then let the houses look to their own sane and living kings and ask which of them has ruled half so well as these two children will. The bond is true, the choosing is sound, Lord Malfoy's motion is denied. Lucius sat down, his face was smooth. But Harry, watching, saw the smoothness cost him something, saw the first proof close against him with a finality no argument could reopen, and felt, through the thread, Hermione's flicker of fierce vindication, the house defending her sanity and his before the assembled scorn of Britain. The proof of right was past, one down, and the chamber, which had come for a funeral, began, very faintly, to wonder. The proof of mastery was where Yaxley's hand showed, and it nearly killed them, and it was meant to. The heart said it as the old law said it, a test of whether the claimants could wield the powers of the seat, the voice and the loom, under pressure and against resistance, and the resistance, by the old law, was real. The house raised it from its own depths, a guardian, a thing the first Blacks had bound beneath the chamber for exactly this purpose, a construct of stone and shadow and old bound magic that rose up out of the flagstone floor in the shape of a great faceless figure, twice the height of a man, and the law of the trial was simple. The claimants would master it, bind it, turn it, command it with the powers of their seat, or it would master them, and the trial did not pretend that being mastered by it was survivable, but Yaxley had been in the house. That was the thing Harry understood too late in the first seconds of the proof, when the guardian rose and did not move toward them as the old law decreed, but instead turned, wrong askew, its faceless head swinging toward the witnesses, rail, toward Dumbledore and Andromeda and Tonks, because someone had been into the chamber in the 3 days since the Wisengamot, someone who knew the old magic. Someone who had altered the binding of the guardian so that it would not test the claimants cleanly but would run wild, strike where it willed, and turn the proof from an ordeal into a slaughter the children would be blamed for failing to prevent. "It's loose," Hermione said, and her voice was very fast and very clear. "Harry, it's not bound to the trial anymore. Someone's cut it free of the test binding. It'll go for the witnesses. It'll kill someone, and the houses will say we couldn't control our own house's guardian. Then we control it," Harry said, and reached for the voice. He had learned in a month of training what the voice could do and what it could not, and he had learned in the gallery on the day he tore a hole in his own house what happened when he reached for it in fear, so he did not reach for it in fear. He reached for it the way Hermione had taught him to reach for it, with her judgment under his will, the two halves of the seat moving as one, and he felt her there, instantly, the break in the weight and the law, and together they took hold of the guardian. It fought them. It had been cut loose and set wild by a hand that knew the old magic, and it did not want to be bound, and for a moment it dragged against the voice like a current against a swimmer, and Harry felt the strength of it and knew that he could not hold it alone, that the voice could command the house but the guardian had been severed from the house's obedience, that commanding it was not enough, that it had to be rebound, retied to the trial it had been cut from, and that was not the voice's work at all. That was the loom's. "I have it," Hermione said, not aloud, through the thread, the words arriving in him whole. "I can see where it was cut, Harry. I can see the binding someone severed. It's the same kind of work as the green door, a clean, knowledgeable cut. He knew exactly which thread to sever. Hold it still, give me 3 seconds, and Harry poured the voice into the Guardian, not commanding it now but simply holding it. Pinning the wild thing in place with the whole weight of the Lord of the House of Black, while Hermione, beside him, her crown blazing, reached into the loom and found the severed binding and retied it, rebound the Guardian to the trial it had been cut from, knotted the wild thing back into the obedience of the house, and did it, Harry felt, better than it had been bound before, sealing the cut the way she had sealed the flaw in the green door, so that it could not be severed again. The Guardian stopped. It stood faceless, twice the height of a man, bound and obedient, and turned now to its proper purpose. And the heart of the House of Black admitted a single word into the chamber, mastered, and the proof of mastery was passed, and it had been passed not by a lord alone and not by a lady alone, but by the two of them moving as the single paired sovereignty the house had built, his will and her law, the voice that held and the loom that bound, and every witch and wizard on the black benches had seen it. And Harry turned in the ringing aftermath and looked across the chamber at Corvus Yaxley and let him see that he knew. "You were in our house," Harry said, and he did not raise his voice, and the voice was in it, and it carried to every corner of the deep chamber. "You cut the Guardian loose to make it murder our witnesses and call it our failure, in a trial of right, before the heart of the house that's judging us. He let that hang. The house felt you do it, Mr. Yaxley. It's in the loom. Every thread you touched, you've just tried to commit murder in front of the one witness in Britain that cannot be deceived, and it will remember." A stir ran along the benches. Yaxley did not flinch. But Harry saw for the first time the gray man recalculate in a way that was not cold confidence but something nearer to alarm, because he had been seen, and not by men whose votes he had counted, but by the heart of the House of Black, and a man who had spent his life on arithmetic had just discovered a term in the equation that could not be bribed, threatened, or out-argued. He inclined his head fractionally and said nothing, and the silence was, for the first time, his and not theirs. 2 proofs passed. The chamber that had come for a funeral had gone very quiet, and the heart of the House of Black turned its great cold attention upon the 2 children, and admitted into the chamber the third and final word, and the word was worth. The chamber did not stay silent long. 2 proofs passed where the houses had come to see none, and the black benches stirred with something the witnesses had not brought with them, doubt. Harry felt it through the voice as much as saw it, the assembled aristocracy of Britain, who had come dressed for a funeral, beginning, against their will, to recalculate. The Selwyn elder leaned to murmur to the not patriarch. The Parkinson matriarch's hard bright eyes had narrowed from contempt into something warier. Because the thing they had told themselves, that the crowns were a delirium, an accident, a dying enchantment's mistake, did not survive watching 2 children pass the proof of right against Lucius Malfoy's own argument, and the proof of mastery against a guardian that had been sabotaged to kill them. Doubt, once it enters a room full of people who have wagered their pride on a certainty, does not stay one person's doubt for long. It was Lucius who felt it spreading and moved to stop it, because Lucius understood crowds better than any man in the chamber. He rose a second time, smooth and grave, and he did not attack the children that had failed twice, but turned instead to the benches, to his own coalition, to shore up the certainty he could feel draining out of them. 2 proofs, he said, with a dismissive grace that was its own small masterpiece. 2 proofs of form. The bond is real, we granted that. The children can wield what the bond gives them, very well, but neither proof touches the question that matters. A clever beast can be taught to hold a wand. The question the house has yet to ask, the only question that has ever mattered for the holding of an ancient seat, is not whether they can wield the power. It is whether they are fit to, whether there is anything inside them but cleverness and luck. The proof of worth remains, my friends, and I would counsel you to hold your doubts until you have seen what the house finds when it looks inside 2 children and asks them what they are. He let his pale gaze move across the children, almost pitying. I have met a great many clever people who were hollow at the center. The house is about to find out whether these 2 are any different. I, for one, am content to wait for the house's own verdict on their worth. I suspect it will spare us all a great deal of trouble. It was, Harry understood, a genuinely dangerous move, because it conceded the 2 proofs the children had won and bet everything on the one proof no one could prepare for, the one that reached into a claimant and found the thing they were most afraid was true. Lucius had stopped trying to win the proofs of form. He had decided to win on worth, because he believed, with the deep certainty of a hollow man, that everyone was hollow at the center, and that the house, looking into 2 children, would find emptiness and call it unfit. And the cruelty of it was that he had named, without knowing it, the exact thing Harry was most afraid of: the empty boy, the cupboard, the nothing at the center, and Harry felt the fear of it rise in him in front of 500 enemies, felt Lucius's words find the oldest wound he had and press. He's trying to frighten you, Hermione said, low through the thread before Harry could sink into it, before the proof even starts. He's putting the worst thing you believe about yourself into your head on purpose, so that when the house reaches in, that's the thing it finds already raw and bleeding. Don't let him hand the house your fear pre-sharpened. Whatever you're most afraid of in there, he doesn't know it. He's guessing. He guesses everyone's hollow because he is. He's wrong about you. He's been wrong about you since the first letter. A pause and then fierce and certain down the link. I've seen the center of you, Harry. I've been living in your head all summer. It is not empty. Whatever the house shows you, remember that someone who's actually looked is telling you he's wrong. And Harry, on the cold flagstone floor with the whole hostile weight of the house's watching and Lucius Malfoy's pale, certain gaze upon him, took her words and held them like an anchor against the proof he could feel gathering, and felt the fear settle from a thing that might drown him into a thing he could carry. Lucius had meant to send him into the proof of worth pre-wounded. Instead, because of the thread, because of her, he would go in armed, not with confidence, he had none, but with the one thing that could survive the dark of his own worst fear, the knowledge that someone who had actually seen the center of him had found it worth choosing. Dumbledore from the high seat said nothing, but his blue eyes moved from Lucius to the children and back, and Harry read in them that the old man knew exactly what Malfoy had done and exactly why it was clever, and that there was nothing he could do to help because the proof of worth was faced alone. The chief warlock's hands tightened on the rail. The chamber held its breath. And the heart of the House of Black, having heard the speech of men and found it, as always, beside the point, turned its great cold attention upon the two children, and prepared to ask them the only question it had ever truly cared about. The proof of worth took them out of the chamber, though their bodies never moved. Harry knew at the instant it began, because the deep chamber and the black benches and the watching houses simply went away, not faded, not darkened, but were replaced whole and sudden by somewhere else, and the somewhere else was the cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive, and Harry Potter was small in it, and it was dark, and he was alone. He understood what the house was doing. He had been warned. The proof of worth reached into a claimant and found the thing they were most afraid was true about themselves and made them face it, and watch what they did. And the thing Harry Potter had been most afraid was true about himself for as long as he could remember was that he was nothing, that the cupboard was the truth of him and the rest was accident, that no one had come for him because there was nothing in him worth coming for. That the scar and the prophecy and the crowns had all landed on an empty boy who had been given a destiny he had not earned and could not fill, and the cupboard knew it. The voice that came out of the dark was Vernon Dursley's and Petunia's and his own, all at once, and it said the thing he had spent his whole life not letting himself believe. That he was nobody, that the house had made a mistake, that a piece of dying rock had reached out in its delirium and crowned an empty boy because there was no one better left, that the moment anyone looked closely they would see there was nothing there, nothing, a boy-shaped absence in a cupboard, and that the kindest thing he could do for the House of Black and for Hermione and for everyone was to admit it and take off the crown and go back into the dark where he belonged. It was very convincing. That was the cruelty of the proof. It was not a lie. It used Harry's own voice and Harry's own deepest fear, and it did not need to invent anything because the fear had been there all along, waiting, and all the house had to do was give it a room to speak in. And Harry sat in the cupboard, small and alone, and felt it reach for him, and felt through the thread, faint and far away but unbroken, Hermione. She was somewhere else in her own proof, facing her own thing, and he could not see it and could not reach it, but he could feel her, the fact of her, fighting something in the dark exactly as he was, and the feeling of her was the thing the cupboard's voice had not accounted for. Because the house had reached into Harry Potter to find the thing he was most afraid was true, and it had found the cupboard and the empty boy, but it had reached into him after the crowning, after a month of holding a seat too heavy for one, after Gringotts and the loom and the green door and the guardian, and the boy it found in the cupboard was not the boy who had gone in. The boy it found had been chosen, not by accident. Deliberately clear-eyed by a magic older than souls, which had weighed every living will in its reach and wanted him and had said why. The boy who has owned nothing and covets nothing and will not be made cruel by power because he has wanted it too long and too honestly. You've got it wrong, Harry said to the cupboard, to the voice, to the oldest fear he had. I used to believe you, for years. I thought the cupboard was the truth and everything else was a mistake waiting to be found out. He stood up, and the cupboard, which had been built to a small boy's size, did not fit him anymore, because he was not that small anymore, and the ceiling of it broke against his shoulders like something rotten and gave way. But the house didn't choose me by accident. It chose me on purpose. It looked at everything I am, the cupboard, the emptiness, all of it, the parts I'm most ashamed of, and it wanted me anyway, and it told me why, and the why was there was no one better left. The why was that I've got nothing, and I want nothing, and I won't turn cruel. That's not an empty boy. That's the only kind of person who can hold this without becoming what the Blacks became. The cupboard was coming apart around him, the dark peeling back, the voice failing. I'm not nothing, I never was, I was just never told otherwise by anyone who counted. And a piece of the first dark older than this whole world looked into me and counted, so you can keep the cupboard. I'm done living in it. The dark broke and the cupboard was gone, and Harry stood in the deep chamber again with the black benches and the watching houses and the core atrium shining over him, and the heart of the House of Black admitted, soft into his mind alone, worthy. But the proof was not over because there were two claimants and only one had passed. Hermione was still in hers. Harry felt it the instant he came back, the thread taut and straining, Hermione somewhere on the far end of it, fighting and not winning. He could not see her proof, but he could feel the shape of the thing she was facing because he had spent a month learning to feel her, and the thing she was facing was not the cupboard, was not emptiness, was the opposite of emptiness. It was the thing Hermione Granger had been most afraid was true about herself since the first night of the sorting, since the first time a pale boy in green had called her the word creature had called her, since the house itself had looked at her in the gallery and said the wrong house. That she did not belong, that she was chosen but not born, granted but not owed, that her whole claim to the seat and the crown and the law of an ancient house rested on a gift that could be taken back, because she had no blood in it, no root, nothing that was truly hers, that she was and would always be a guest in a house that had every right to remember she did not come from it, that the crown on her head was borrowed. That the moment the house's whim changed, or the moment someone with real blood pressed the point, she would be shown the door, because the door had always, really, been the truth of her in the wizarding world, the muggle-born girl let in on sufferance who could be let out again at any time. And the proof was using the house's own first words against her. The wrong house, you are chosen but you are not ours. You are a thing we picked up and we may put you down, and Harry felt her fighting it with reason. The way she fought everything, marshalling arguments. I earned it, I sealed the green door, I bound the guardian, I read the law better than the houses that made it, and he felt the arguments not working, because the thing she was facing was not an argument, it was a wound. And you could not reason a wound closed, and Hermione Granger, who could reason her way through anything, had finally met the one thing in the house that her mind could not solve, and it was about to take her. So Harry did the thing the house had built them to do. He could not enter her proof. The proof of worth was faced alone, that was its law, but the thread was not part of the proof. The thread was the house's own work, the coregnant link, the thing that ran between them below all words, and Harry took hold of it and he poured himself down it, not arguments, not reasons, because reasons would not reach a wound, but the thing he actually had, the thing that was true, the thing he had never said because they were 12 and 13 and not ready for the name. He sent her belonging, not the house's, his. He sent her the truth of how he saw her, not the chosen lady, not the borrowed crown, but Hermione, who had walked into a wall of dark in a nightdress because he was on the other side of it, who had stood on the cold flagstones of the Wisengamot and turned 500 enemies, who had reached into a curse that was eating her and sealed it better than the Blacks ever had, who had wept that the world treated her differently for a name and then taken the name and used it to call an outcast woman home. He sent her the thing he had understood in the gallery on the first night and had not had a word for, that she did not belong to the House of Black because the House of Black had chosen her. She belonged because he had. Because somewhere in a month of holding a thing too heavy for one, the boy who had owned nothing and wanted nothing had come to want exactly one thing, and it was her, and that wanting was not a gift the house could take back, because it was not the house's to take. You're not a guest, Harry told her down the thread with everything he had. You're not borrowed. The house didn't make me need you, it just noticed that I would. You belong here because I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, and there is no whim and no blood and no door in the whole world that changes that. The house chose you, fine, but I choose you, every day, not because a rock told me to, because it's you. Now stop trying to reason with the wound and come back, because I can't hold this seat without you and I don't want to and I'm not going to have to, because you're going to walk out of there and we're going to do this together for the rest of our lives. And I have wanted exactly one thing in my whole life that was good, and it's this, it's you. Come back. And Hermione Granger, alone in the dark with the oldest wound she had, stopped trying to reason it closed and felt instead the thing pouring down the thread. The belonging that was not borrowed and could not be taken back, and she did the only thing the proof had not accounted for. She let herself believe it, not reasoned into, believed. And the wound, which had survived every argument she had ever made against it, could not survive being simply, finally, loved past, and the dark broke, and Hermione came back. She came back into the deep chamber with tears standing in her eyes and her crown blazing on her brow, and the heart of the House of Black admitted into the whole chamber now, into the mind of every witness on the black benches, the final word of the final proof, worthy, both claimants, the trial of right is past, the seat is theirs by the judgment of the House, sovereign and final, and there is no appeal from it in this world or out of it. Let every house here gathered bend the knee or be forsworn. And the houses bent the knee, not gladly, not all at once. But the judgment of the trial of right was binding by the same old law the houses had invoked to attack the children, and to refuse it was to unmake themselves, and one by one on the black benches, the assembled aristocracy of magical Britain bowed to two children it had come to watch die, Selwyn and Knott and Parkinson and the rest, the knee bent stiff and furious and unanswerable. And Narcissa Malfoy bent hers not stiffly at all, but with something on her cold face that might at last have been relief. And Lucius Malfoy of Grey, his certainty in ruins, bent his because there was nothing else left to do, and Harry watched him do it and knew that the man would never forgive it and would be back by quieter roads, but that for tonight, in this chamber, before this witness, it was done. Only Corvus Yaxley did not bow. He stood gray and alone while the houses bent around him, and he looked at the two crowned children across the chamber, and Harry braced for defiance, and instead the gray man inclined his head, slowly, fully, lower than Harry had ever seen him bow, and what was in his bloodless face was not surrender and not respect, but something colder and more dangerous than either. Recalculation, total and final, a man who had bet everything on the arithmetic and watched the arithmetic break, and was already, behind the pale eyes, beginning to count again from a different and darker page. "The House has judged," Corvus Yaxley said in the gray level voice to the whole chamber and to no one. "I am bound by it as we all are bound. The seat is theirs." A pause. "By the old law." And the way he said the old law told Harry, cold down to his bones, that the man had not given up, that he had merely learned that the children could not be beaten by the law of men, and had begun to look for an older law, a darker one, a thing that did not care what the heart had judged. And Harry thought with sudden certainty of the green door at the end of the gallery of the dead, the smoking door that strained against its sleep, and the writ of blood that Bellatrix Lestrange had left in the walls against exactly this day. But that was tomorrow's enemy. Tonight the trial was past. The witnesses filed out into the London dawn, and when the last of them was gone, the deep chamber belonged again to the house and to the two children it had judged, and for a while neither of them could move. They sat on the cold flagstone floor at the foot of the throne because their legs would not hold them any longer. The proof of worth took more than it showed, and they had each walked through the worst thing they believed about themselves and come out the other side, and a person does not do that and then stroll cheerfully up to bed. Harry's hands were shaking. He noticed it distantly, as though they belonged to someone else. Beside him, Hermione had her arms wrapped around her knees and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, and through the thread he could feel that she was not entirely back yet, that some part of her was still standing in the dark of her proof, hearing the house say the wrong house, the wrong house. "It used my own words against me," she said at last, very quietly. "The house is, from the first night, the wrong house. It found the thing I've been most afraid of since I was 11 years old, and it said it in the house's own voice, and I couldn't, Harry, I couldn't argue my way out of it. I tried. I always argue my way out of everything. And it didn't work because it wasn't an argument, it was a wound, and you can't reason a wound shut." She turned her head and looked at him. "You got me out, I felt it. Whatever you did down the thread, that's the only reason I'm sitting here. I want to know what you said." I couldn't hear the words, I could only feel them. Harry was quiet for a moment, because the thing he had sent her was not a thing he had said before out loud to anyone, and saying it now in the cold aftermath felt larger than the trial had. "I told you that you don't belong here because the house chose you," he said. "You belong here because I did. Because somewhere in this whole impossible summer I stopped being able to imagine doing any of it without you, and that's not a thing a dying rock decided, it's a thing I decided, and nobody can take a thing like that back because it isn't theirs to take." He made himself meet her eyes. "The house found the part of you that's always been afraid the welcome could be withdrawn, and I told it that there's at least one welcome in the world that can't be mine, that's all. I don't think it was clever. I think it was just true, and the proof couldn't survive something just being true." Hermione looked at him for a long moment in the black light of the heart, and then she did something she had not done in front of anyone since she was very small. She let herself cry briefly, without arguing herself out of it, without apologizing for it, 2 or 3 tears that she did not wipe away. "I've spent my whole life," she said, "being the cleverest person in every room and being told in 100 small ways that it didn't matter, that I'd always be the muggle-born girl let in on sufferance. And tonight an ancient magic reached into me to find the worst of that and use it to break me, and instead of breaking I found out that somewhere in the last 2 months I stopped believing it. Not because I argued myself out of it, because of you." She wiped her face finally and gave a small wet laugh. "Which is going to be unbearably inconvenient, by the way, because I have built my entire personality on not needing anyone, and now there's incontrovertible evidence that I need you specifically, and I'm going to have to live with that for the rest of my life." "I'll try to be gracious about it," Harry said, and felt the answering warmth come down the thread, and felt her come, finally, all the way back from the dark of her proof. They sat a while longer at the foot of the throne, 2 13-year-olds who had been tried by the oldest magic in Britain and found worthy, letting the trembling pass, letting the dawn come up somewhere far above them in the waking city. The heart of the House of Black watched over them, quiet and clean and no longer dying, and it did not speak again, because it had said the only word that mattered, worthy, worthy, both of them, and there was nothing left to add to it. And when at last their legs would hold them, they got up together, steadying each other without being asked, and climbed up out of the deep toward the morning, leaving the throne behind them and carrying between them the thing the proof had finally forced into the open, that the seat was theirs and that they were each other's, and that the two facts were and would always be the same fact. They freed Sirius Black 11 days later, and it was the first thing they did with the seat that was now, beyond all appeal, theirs. The authority of a seated lord of an ancient house reached, as the heart had promised on the first night, far enough into the world to compel a retrial of one of its own blood, and with the trial of right past and the houses bound and Dumbledore's weight behind them in the Wisengamot, the compulsion could not be refused. The loom held the truth of every black deed, and the truth of Sirius's was that he had not betrayed the Potters and had not killed the 13 Muggles, and had spent 9 years in the dark for a murderer who walked free in the shape of a rat, and the heart of the House of Black would testify to it before the Wisengamot in the admitted meaning that could not lie, and against that testimony no conviction could stand. He came out of Azkaban thin as a wound, gray-faced, his eyes too big in his hollowed face, and he came to Grimmauld Place because it was the only home he had left, the house he had been burned off the tapestry of as a boy for the crime of being himself, and he stood in the front hall of the house that had cast him out, and looked at the 2 children who had reached into his family's cruelty and undone it, who had pulled him out of the dark with the power of a seat the house had given them past all its own blood. And he did not have words for a while. "You're James's boy," he said at last to Harry, his ruined voice cracking on it. "You've got Lily's eyes, I'd have known you anywhere." And then, because he was a marauder still, somewhere under 9 years of dark, the ghost of a grin found his hollow face. "And you're the lord of the most ancient and noble House of Black, which means technically you're my lord, which is the single funniest thing that has happened to me in a decade, and I have had a very bad decade, so I'm going to need you to let me enjoy it." "Sirius," Harry said, and found that his own voice did not work properly either. "The house reinstated you," Hermione said gently. "You're back on the tapestry, the burns healed, you're black again, properly in the name and the wards. And you're Harry's godfather and the house knows it, and there's a place here for you for as long as you want it. You're not going back to the dark, not ever, we made sure of it." She paused and added with the precision that was hers even now, even here, "Also you're the heir after us. The house needs the line, and you're the nearest free blood that it actually trusts, so you're rather important now, I'm afraid. We're going to need you." Sirius Black looked at the 2 children who had given him back his name and his freedom and apparently his entire future in the span of a single sentence, and something broke in his hollow face that had been frozen for 9 years, and he crossed the hall and pulled Harry into an embrace that shook, the thin arms fierce around his godson, and over Harry's shoulder he reached out and drew Hermione in too, the lady of his house, the Muggle-born girl who had called him home. And the 3 of them stood in the front hall of the House of Black, and for the first time in either of the children's lives, and for the first time in 9 years of Sirius, none of them was alone. Outside in the London dark, the city did not know that the oldest house in it had crowned 2 children, judged them worthy, and pulled an innocent man out of the sea fortress in the span of a single summer. But the house knew. The house was awake and warm and no longer dying, and it had a lord and a lady who had passed its oldest ordeal not apart but together, and a freed heir weeping in its hall, and an enemy somewhere out in the dark already counting from a colder page. And at the end of the gallery of the dead, behind the smoking green door that had strained against its sleep for 9 years, something stirred, woke, a little the loud way, the way they would see coming, because the heart of the House of Black had spoken the word worthy over 2 children before the assembled houses of Britain, and the writ of blood that Bellatrix Lestrange had left in the walls against exactly this day had finally heard the thing it had been waiting 9 years to hear, and it did not agree. And it began in the dark to wake. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, Enemies of the House. The writ woke in the 3rd week of August, and it woke the way Hermione had built the seal to make it wake, loud and slow enough to see, and far too strong to stop. She felt it first because it came through the loom, and the loom was hers. She came awake in the dark before dawn with the thread between her and Harry already screaming, and she was out of bed and down the gallery before she was fully awake, her bare feet cold on the black stone, her crown burning itself to full brightness on her brow without her summoning it. Because the house was summoning it, the house was afraid. Harry met her at the head of the stair, wand in hand, his own crown blazing, and neither of them needed to ask the other what was wrong, because they could both feel it now, a vast cold pressure rising up out of the deep of the house, from the end of the gallery of the dead, from the smoking green door that had strained against its sleep for 9 years and was straining no longer. It was open. They came to it together down the corridor of the dead with its hundreds of dark doors and its handful of low living lights, and the green door at the end stood open onto a dark that was not the clean cold dark of the rest of the house but a wrong dark, a stained dark, a dark that smelled of old blood and madness and a sweetness like flowers left too long in a sick room. And out of it, unspooling into the corridor like smoke given purpose, came the writ of Bellatrix Lestrange. It had no body. That was the first horror of it. Bellatrix herself was 1,000 miles away in a cell in Azkaban, mad and chained and beyond reach. But she had not needed to be here because 9 years ago, when the house began to die and she understood that the seat might one day be filled by someone other than the pure, she had come down into the gallery of the dead and she had cut her own arm open and written in her own blood on the walls of the house, a thing that would wake and act and contest in her absence. A piece of her will, a revenant of her purpose, bound in blood, sleeping, patient, waiting for the one thing that would rouse it. The moment a black who was not of the blood, not of the pure, dared to sit the seat and be named worthy. The heart had named 2 children worthy before the assembled houses of Britain, and the writ had heard it, and now it was awake. It poured into the corridor as a darkness with Bellatrix's voice braided through it, a low mad sing-song that Harry felt in his teeth, and the words it sang were the old dark law it had been written to assert. Blood over choice, blood over choice. The seat is the blood's, the seat is the pure's, the seat is mine, I am the eldest living black, I am the blood, and no dying rock's whim, no half-blood, no muddling, no mudblood, and the sweetness curdled to fury on the word, shall sit the high seat of my house while there is blood to claim it. I contest. By the old law, by the law of blood over choice, by the writ I wrote in my own veins against this very day, I contest. It's claiming the seat, Hermione said, fast, her mind already moving even as the dark poured toward them. It's a legal instrument, Harry, that's what a writ is. She didn't leave a curse, she left a claim by the oldest dark law of the house, blood over choice, that says the seat belongs to the nearest pure blood regardless of what the magic chooses, and it's contesting our right, and if it's strong enough to press the claim, it'll go for the heart, Harry finished, because he could feel it now, could feel the writ's purpose through the voice, and its purpose was not them. It poured past them down the corridor, ignoring the 2 children entirely, because 2 children were not what it had been written to defeat. It had been written to take the seat, and the seat was the core atrum. The writ of Bellatrix Lestrange was driving down into the deep of the house, toward the heart itself, to seize the throne of Starglass and assert blood over choice at the very source of the house's magic, to make the heart unsay the word worthy, to force the dying rock to crown the blood instead of the chosen. And if it reached the heart, if it took hold of the core atrum, the crowns would come off the children's brows, and the seat would pass to the mad blood in the Azkaban cell. And everything they had won would unwind in an hour. Wake the house, Hermione said. Wake everyone now. The house woke to war. Sirius came first because he was the heir, and the house roused him fastest, wand in hand, and 9 years of Azkaban burned off his face in an instant by the old reflexes of an order fighter. Then Remus Lupin, who had come to stay in the weeks since Sirius's freeing, gray and scarred and steady. Then Tonks, hair gone war-red, already moving. Creature with the locket's old debt paid in his loyalty hole, planting his small frame in the corridor of the dead with a defiance that would have been comic if it were not so fierce. And Dumbledore the house could not summon, but Hermione sent for him through the flue with a word, and he came within minutes, blue robes and grave face, into a house with a dead woman's will pouring through its veins toward its heart. A blood-writ, Dumbledore said when Hermione told him, and for the first time in all their dealings Harry saw the old man truly afraid. I had hoped Bellatrix was always the most gifted and the most terrible of them. To write a contesting claim in living blood, to bind it to wake on a condition 9 years distant, this is magic of a kind the Ministry would not believe possible and could not begin to fight. He looked down the corridor where the stained dark was sinking floor by floor toward the deep. It cannot be destroyed by force. It is not a creature. It is an assertion, a claim in the house's own law, and you cannot kill a claim with a curse. It can only be answered the way a claim is answered in the law it invokes. It contests by blood over choice. You must defeat it on that ground or not at all. His blue eyes found the 2 children, and I do not know how. The old dark law is on its side. Blood over choice is real law, older than the choosing of the quick, and by the letter of it, Bellatrix Lestrange has the better claim. She is of the blood, and you are not, and the law she invokes does not care what the heart prefers. I can help you hold the house. I cannot win you the argument. That, I am afraid, is yours. Then we hold the house while we work it out, Harry said. Sirius, Remus, Tonks, the writ's going for the heart, down through the galleries. We can't kill it, but we can slow it. The house will fight with us. It doesn't want this any more than we do. Hermione and I have to get to the core atrum before the writ does and figure out how to answer a claim of blood over choice. He looked at his godfather. Buy us time, however you can. Buying time, said Sirius Black, with the first real grin Harry had seen on him. The marauder's grin, the grin of a man who had nothing left to lose and had just been handed a fight worth losing it in, is the single thing I am best at in all the world. Go, we've got the corridor. Don't you dare make us hold it for nothing. What followed, Harry would remember in fragments, the way one remembers a fire. He remembered the corridor of the dead become a battlefield, Sirius and Remus and Tonks throwing themselves into the path of the stained dark, casting not to destroy it, because it could not be destroyed, but to obstruct it, to wall it, to make it fight for every floor it sank through. He remembered the house fighting with them, doors slamming themselves shut across the writ's path, galleries folding their geometry to lengthen the way down, the green fire of the brackets flaring white-hot where the dark tried to pass, the whole buried palace of the Blacks turning against the dead will of the woman who had defiled its walls. He remembered Creature, small and furious, planting himself at the head of a stair and unleashing the old deep elf magic of a house servant defending his master's home, magic the writ had not expected, magic that cost the dark a full floor of its descent. And he remembered Yaxley, because Corvus Yaxley was in the house. Harry felt him through the voice the moment he came, the thin surgical cold, slipping in through a side door of the wards that should have been sealed and was not because someone had unsealed it, because the writ pouring through the house had thinned the wards enough for a knowledgeable man to slip a single door, and Harry understood, with a cold that matched the man's own, that this was the colder page Yaxley had begun counting from in the trial chamber. He had learned that the children could not be beaten by the law of men. So he had gone looking for an older law, a darker one. He had found the one creature in all the world who still pressed a claim against the seat by blood over choice, found her through her sister, perhaps through Narcissa or through the old networks of the Cabal, and he had not woken the writ because the writ would wake on its own, but he had come, on the night it woke, to do the one thing that would tip the balance, to help it. To stand in the house as a living wizard of the old blood and lend the dead claim a living hand. Harry found him on the stair above the deep gallery, where the corridor of the dead gave onto the descent to the core atrium, and Yaxley was not trying to pass, he was holding the door. He stood at the head of the last stair with his wand out, and he was casting methodically, coldly, to keep the way open for the writ, to fight off the house's attempts to slam the deep gallery shut, a living man holding the gate for a dead woman's will, and when he saw Harry and Hermione coming, his bloodless face showed no surprise at all. "You should not be here, Lord Black," he said, level as ever, not pausing in his casting. "You should be fleeing. The writ has the better claim, and I have the open gate, and there is nothing the two of you can do at the heart but watch the seat taken from you. I did try to warn you. The trial of right could not save you, because the law of men was never the deepest law. Blood is. Blood always was. You were clever, and you were brave, and you were never going to be enough, because you are not of the blood, and the house, whatever its dying whim, belongs to the blood." For the first time, something almost like regret crossed the gray face. "I do not even dislike you, that is the pity of it. But I have spent my life on the order of things, and the order of things is that the pure inherit, and I will not watch a muggle-born child wear the crown of an ancient house while there is a single thing I can do to prevent it. So, the gate stays open, and the seat goes to the blood. Harry," Hermione said very quietly beside him, "go, get to the heart, I'll hold Yaxley. I'm not leaving you with, you have to, listen to me." Her voice was fast and certain, the voice she used when she had seen the whole board. "The writ's almost at the heart, I can feel it through the loom, it's nearly there. One of us has to be at the core atrium to answer the claim when it arrives, and it has to be you, because the answer is going to need the voice, and the voice is yours. But Yaxley's holding the gate open, and if he keeps it open, the house can't help you at the heart. It'll be spending all its strength fighting his casting up here. So one of us answers the writ at the heart, and one of us shuts the gate on Yaxley so the house can turn its full strength to you. You take the heart, I take Yaxley. That's the only way the numbers work." She was already turning to face the gray man, her crown blazing, the loom unrolling itself in the air around her. "Go, Harry. I can hold a gate, it's just a binding, and bindings are mine. G.O." And Harry, every instinct screaming against it, did the hardest thing the seat had yet asked of him. He trusted her. He trusted her judgment over his fear, because that was the whole architecture of them, her judgment and his will, and her judgment said go. And so he went down the last stair into the deep, into the chamber of the core atrium, leaving the lady of the House of Black alone at the head of the stair to face a grown dark wizard with nothing but the law in her hands. The corridor of the dead became the last stand of the House of Black's living, and Sirius Black was magnificent in it. Harry caught it in fragments as he ran for the deep, glances thrown back over his shoulder, impressions carried up the thread from the part of him that would always, now, be tied to this house and everyone fighting for it. Sirius stood at the head of the gallery where the stained dark poured down, and 9 years of Azkaban had burned off him entirely, and what was left was the duelist James Potter had loved and the marauder the old families had feared, throwing himself bodily into the path of a dead woman's will with a wand in his hand and a grin on his hollow face. "Come on then," he was shouting at the dark, at the braided, mad voice of his own cousin's writ. "You want the house, Bella, you always wanted the house. Come and take it past me." He could not destroy the writ, none of them could, but he could obstruct it, and he did, conjuring walls of stone across the corridor, collapsing the geometry of galleries into the dark's path, buying the descent floor by floor with the reckless generosity of a man who had nothing left to lose and had found, at the end of the dark, something finally worth spending himself on. Beside him, Remus Lupin fought with the gray, methodical patience of a man who had survived everything by being careful, his casting a perfect counterweight to Sirius's fire. Where Sirius threw himself forward, Remus shored up behind, sealing what Sirius bought, making the obstruction hold. They had fought like this before, Harry understood, in another war, a lifetime ago. The rhythm of it was older than his own life. 2 old soldiers who had buried most of their friends, falling back into a partnership grief, had interrupted but never broken. Tonks fought like the aura she had only just become, fierce and fast and untidy, her war-red hair streaming. and when the stained dark broke past Sirius's wall in a tendril that reached for the witness's rail where Dumbledore stood working his slow, terrible countermagic, it was Tonks who threw herself across its path, Tonks who took the writs reaching cold across her shield arm and went down and got up again, swearing, and Harry felt through the thread the moment the house itself noticed her. Noticed the daughter it had once cast out before she was even born, the Black who had never been allowed to be won, standing in the corridor of the dead bleeding to defend a house that owed her nothing. And the house, healing, remade, no longer the thing that burned its children off the cloth, reached out and gave her its strength, poured the green fire of the brackets into her wand, and Nymphadora Tonks rose with the light of the House of Black blazing down her arm and drove the stained dark back a full floor, and somewhere above them in the dark the tapestry inked her name a shade brighter. Creature fought too, and his fighting was the strangest and the oldest. The wretched old elf planted himself at the head of the last stair before the deep, where the writ had to pass to reach the heart, and he raised his cracked voice in the deep house magic of a servant defending his master's home, magic the ministry did not believe elves possessed, magic the old families had grown too proud to remember, the bound and ancient power of a creature whose whole being was the house he served. Creature serves the House of Black. He shrilled at the dark, at the will of the mistress he had once worshipped, and there was a grief in it and a triumph both, because the mistress's daughter had become the thing in the dark, and Creature had found at last masters worthier than the ones who had broken his heart. Creature serves the Lord and the Lady, the true Lord and Lady, and Creature will not let the bad blood pass. And the dark, which had expected no resistance from a house elf, faltered against the oldest and humblest magic in the building, and lost against Creature alone the better part of a minute it could not spare. They could not win. Harry knew it and they knew it. The writ had the better claim and the open gate and a strength that no obstruction could finally stop, but they did not have to win. They only had to hold to buy the minutes to spend themselves keeping the way long while two children raced to the places they had to be, and they held with everything they had, the freed convict and the careful wolf and the fierce young Auror and the wretched faithful elf, the whole strange family the House of Black had gathered out of the people it had once thrown away, and it was enough. It was exactly, barely, bleedingly enough. He felt the duel begin behind him through the thread, felt the shock of Yaxley's first curse and Hermione's first answer, felt her cold, steady mind turn the full force of the loom against the man's casting, not to outduel him, because she could not outduel a trained killer, but to do the one thing she was the best in the house at, to unbind. Every ward Yaxley raised, she unraveled. Every binding he set on the gate to hold it open, she cut. She could not curse him, but she could undo everything he did as fast as he did it, and Harry felt the man's cold confidence falter as he discovered that the 13-year-old he had dismissed could untie his magic faster than he could tie it. And Harry held that feeling close. She's all right, she's winning her piece of it, trust her, and ran on down into the deep, to where the writ of Bellatrix Lestrange had reached the heart of the House of Black. The chamber of the core atrium was full of stained dark. It had poured down ahead of him, all of it, the whole pooled will of the dead mad woman, and it had wrapped itself around the throne of star glass like a closing hand, and Bellatrix's braided voice filled the chamber with its mad sing-song triumph. Mine, mine, the blood reclaims its own, unsay the word, unsay it, the rock will crown the blood, the rock will obey, and the core atrium, the heart, the captured fragment of the first dark, was fighting it, was shining its black light against the stain, but the heart was old and dying, and the writ was a claim in the house's own law, and the law was on the writ's side, and Harry could feel the heart beginning terribly to bend, to consider the claim, to weigh blood over choice, to wonder whether the dead woman's writ was, by the letter of the oldest law, correct. Don't, Harry said in the voice, and the chamber rang with it, and the stained dark recoiled and then surged back furious. The half-blood, Bellatrix's writ crooned, delighted, hateful. The half-blood comes to plead. Plead then, little lord, plead to a law that does not hear you. You are not of the blood, the seat is the blood's. There is nothing you can say, there's everything I can say, Harry said, because you've got the law wrong. And I've had a month to learn it, and you've been asleep in a wall for 9 years, and the house has changed. He reached for Hermione through the thread, not for her strength this time, but for her mind, for the thing she had found in the loom in the weeks of their mastering, the thing he had only half understood when she explained it, and understood completely now, with the writ's claim ringing in his ears. Because Hermione, who read the deepest law of the house, had found the truth about blood over choice that the writ, in its mad certainty, did not know, that no living Black had bothered to learn in centuries, and she fed it to him now down the thread, even as she dueled Yaxley at the head of the stair, because this was the architecture of them and it held even here, her knowledge, his voice. Blood over choice isn't what you think it is, Harry said to the writ, to the stained dark, to the bending heart. It's older than the choosing of the quick, yes, and it says the seat belongs to the blood over the chosen, yes, but it doesn't say what you need it to say. You think it means the seat goes to the nearest pure blood. It doesn't. Read it, really read it, the way she did. His voice gathered, the voice of the house, every name in his crown turning behind it. Blood over choice means the seat belongs to the blood of the house, to the one who is bound to the house by blood, by oath, by the deep magic of belonging over a stranger merely chosen from outside. It was written to stop an outsider seizing the seat. It was written to protect the house from exactly the kind of cold opportunist who's holding the gate open upstairs right now. And by that law, by the real law, the true law, the question isn't who has the purest blood. The question is who is bound to this house by blood, and the heart of the House of Black, which had been bending, stopped bending and turned its great cold attention upon the question Harry had set before it. I am, Harry said, blood of Doria Black. The house showed me on the first night, thinned, turned aside, denied, but real. I am of the blood of this house. And more than that, and here he played the card Hermione had found, the card that turned the whole claim. I'm bound to it by the deepest blood magic there is. The house reinstated Andromeda, it reinstated Sirius. It made them black again in the name, in the wards, by the Lord and Lady's own hand. And the night we were crowned, the heart bound Hermione into the house by the adoption of magic. It didn't just choose her, it took her into the blood, made her black by right, by the house's own deepest law. She's not chosen from outside, she's blood of the house, made so by the heart itself. His voice rang to the chamber's roof. Bellatrix Lestrange left this house 20 years ago. She gave her name to the Lestranges. She's married out, blood of another house now, and her writ claims a seat by a law that protects the house from outsiders, and SHE is the outsider. She's the stranger seizing from outside. We are the blood of the house. By blood over choice, by your own law, by the law you wrote in your own veins, the seat is ours, and you, Bellatrix, are the interloper the law was written to keep out. The chamber went utterly silent. And the heart of the House of Black, the captured fragment of the first dark, older than souls, older than law, weighed the claim of the dead woman's writ against the claim Harry Potter had set before it, weighed blood over choice not as the writ wished it read, but as it was truly written, and found in the deep cold star-glass truth of it, that the boy was right, that the law the writ invoked did not say what the writ needed it to say. That by the real and ancient meaning of blood over choice, the seat belonged to the blood of the house, and the blood of the house was a boy descended from Doria, and a girl adopted into the line by the heart's own right, and the interloper, the outsider, the stranger seizing from beyond the house's own blood, was Bellatrix Lestrange, married out, given to another name, pressing a claim by a law that named her the very thing it was written to exclude. The writ contested. It was a thing of mad will, and it did not want to lose, and it threw the whole stained weight of itself against the judgment, but a writ was a claim, and a claim defeated in the law it invoked had no force left, and Harry felt the heart render its judgment with a finality that shook the chamber. The law of blood over choice is rightly read. The blood of the house holds the seat. The writ of Bellatrix Lestrange, of the House of Lestrange, married out and stranger to this blood, is denied, and being denied is void, and being void is unmade. And the heart of the House of Black drew the stained dark down into its star-glass and drank it, as it had drunk the locket, as it had drunk the first dark before there were stars. The whole pooled will of the dead mad woman, 9 years in the writing, gone in an instant into the deep, and the chamber was clean, and the throne stood quiet, and the green door at the end of the gallery of the dead, far above, sealed itself for the last time and would never open again. But the writ had cost them before it died, and the cost was at the head of the stair. Harry felt it through the thread in the instant of his triumph, a spike of pain and shock, and then a terrible loosening, a going faint, and he turned from the cleansed throne and ran up out of the deep with his heart in his throat, because the thread that ran between him and Hermione had gone thin, gone dim, gone quiet in a way it had never been since the night of the crowning, and he knew before he reached the stair that something had gone wrong in the duel he had trusted her to win. She had won it. That was the thing he saw when he came up onto the gallery, Yaxley down, disarmed, his cold magic unraveled, and the gate slammed shut. Hermione had done exactly what she said she would do and beaten a grown dark wizard with nothing but the law in her hands. But Yaxley, beaten, undone, his every plan in ruins, had done the last thing a cold man does when the arithmetic has finally and completely broken. He had thrown one final curse, not to win, because winning was gone, but out of the pure grey spite of a man who would not be beaten by a child, and Hermione, her strength spent on unbinding his magic, had not been fast enough to unmake it, and it had struck her, and she had fallen. She lay on the black stone of the gallery with her crown gone dim on her hair and her face the color of ash. And the curse was in her. Harry could feel it through the failing thread, a cold dark thing eating inward, and Sirius was on his knees beside her with his hands hovering helpless, and Remus was casting, and Tonks was shouting for Dumbledore, and Dumbledore was already there, his old face stripped of everything but terror, his wand moving over the fallen girl in patterns Harry did not know. And Harry crossed the gallery and dropped to his knees and took Hermione's cold hand in both of his and reached down the dimming thread with everything he had. "It's a curse of unbinding," Dumbledore said, fast, terrible. "Turned on a person, Yaxley's specialty, his family's craft. It unbinds what holds a body together, what holds a life in its frame. I can slow it, I cannot stop it." It is taking her apart from the inside, undoing the bindings of her, and it will not stop until there is nothing left bound. His blue eyes found Harry's, and there was no comfort in them, only the truth. She unbinds things, Harry. It is the cruelest thing he could have chosen. He turned her own art against her. I do not know how to save her. I am sorry, I do not know. But Harry, kneeling on the black stone with the dimming thread in his hands, did know, or began to, in the cold, clear place that fear had carved in him, because he had spent a month learning the architecture of them, and the architecture was this. She held what was dangerous in him, and he held what was dangerous in her. She unbound things. That was her art, her danger, the thing that could eat her alive, and on the night she had nearly been taken by the green door she had told him the rule of it. It cuts both ways. You hold my temper, I hold your reaching. And now her own art was killing her, unbinding her from the inside, and there was only one person in all the world built to hold the danger of Hermione Granger's unbinding, and he was holding her hand. Get back, Harry said in the voice, and the gallery rang with it, and everyone obeyed, even Dumbledore, even the house. All of you now. He did not know if it would work. He knew only the shape of it, the architecture, the thing the heart had built them for. The curse was unbinding her, undoing the bindings that held her life in its frame, and unbinding was the loom's work, was her work, and the loom was beyond his reach. He could not touch it, but he could reach her. He could reach her through the thread the way she had reached his voice on the night of the Guardian, the way he had reached her wound in the proof of worth, and her art was not gone, only failing, only spending itself wrongly, undoing her instead of the world. And if her danger was the unbinding, then his half of the seat, the thing he was built to hold, was to give her something to bind to. He opened the thread as wide as it would go, wider than the night of the green door, wider than the proof of worth, wider than it had ever been, and he did not pour strength down it, and he did not pour belonging down it. He poured himself, the whole fact of him, the will and the voice and the crown and the boy, everything he was, and he made of himself an anchor, a thing for her to bind to. The curse was unmaking her bindings, so he gave her a new one, the oldest and the strongest the house had ever made, the coregnate link itself, the seat too heavy for one, and he bound her to him. Not her life to his strength, that would only have killed them both, her unbinding to his holding. He took the curse's own work, the undoing eating through her, and he gave it the one thing it could not unmake. The bond the heart of the House of Black had forged between its lord and its lady on the night of the crowning, the fusing, the thing that made neither of them ever entirely alone and neither of them ever entirely safe alone, and he wrapped it around the unbinding curse like a hand closing around a blade. Hold on to me, he told her down the thread with everything. You unbind, I hold. That's the whole thing, that's what we are, that's what it built us for. The curse is taking your bindings apart, so stop being bound by yourself and be bound to me instead. I'm the anchor, I'm not going anywhere. There is no curse and no unbinding in the whole world strong enough to undo what the heart made between us, because it's not your binding and it's not mine, it's ours, it's the seat, and the seat is too heavy for one and it does not break. Hold on to me. Hold on, and the dimming thread, deep in the dark, caught. He felt it catch, felt Hermione, far down at the failing end of the link, stop coming apart and start instead holding on. Felt the curse's unbinding reach the coregnate bond and break against it, because Harry was right, because the bond was not hers to unmake and not the curse's either. Because it was the deepest binding the dying house had made, and it had been made for exactly this. For the moment one of them could not hold, and the other one had to. The cold, dark thing eating through her met the anchor of him and could not unmake it, and could not get past it, and ran out of bindings to undo, because the only one left was the one that held them both, and that one held. The color came back into Hermione's face like dawn coming back into a gray sky. Her crown brightened on her hair. Her cold hand tightened suddenly, fiercely in both of his, and her eyes opened, and they found Harry, kneeling over her on the black stone with the thread blazing between them and tears he did not notice on his face, and she breathed, and the first thing she said in a voice that shook but was hers, entirely hers, was, "You held." "I held," Harry said. "You unbound, we're all right, you're all right, you're all right." And around them the house was quiet, and the writ was unmade, and Yaxley was down and bound and finished, and Sirius was weeping openly, and Tonks had her hand pressed to her mouth, and Dumbledore was looking at the two children with an expression Harry would never forget, the expression of a man who had told them there was no way to save her and had just watched them save her anyway, with nothing but the thing the dying house had built between them and the refusal to let go. Hermione's hand did not loosen in his. She lay on the black stone of the gallery and looked up at the boy who had made himself an anchor for her in the dark. And through the thread, clear and warm and no longer dimming, no longer failing, Harry felt the thing she had believed at last in the proof of worth and had not had to say since, and she said it now out loud in the quiet of the cleansed house, because they had nearly lost it, and you do not nearly lose a thing and keep on not saying it. "I chose you too," Hermione said, "not the house, me. Whatever happens with the seat and the houses and any of it, I want you to know that I chose you too, every day, because it's you." And Harry Potter, lord of the most ancient and noble House of Black, who had owned nothing his whole life and wanted nothing until a dying house gave him a girl to hold a throne with, found that he could not speak at all, and so he simply held on, which was, he had learned, his actual job and the best one he had ever been given. Outside, the long August dark gave way at last to morning, and the first light of it came down through the waking house, and found two children on the floor of an ancient gallery holding each other's hands, alive and chosen and choosing, with the worst of it behind them and the whole of it still ahead. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Lord and Lady ascended the morning after the writ. The House of Black began, for the first time in 200 years, to heal. Harry felt it before he understood it, woke late, after the longest sleep of his life, with the thread between him and Hermione warm and whole and quiet, and lay still for a while feeling the house around him, and the house was different. The cold that had always lived in its deep places, the dying ember cold, was gone. What had replaced it was not warmth exactly, but the absence of grief, the feeling of a house that has finally set down a weight it has carried so long it forgot the weight was not part of itself. The green fire in the brackets burned steady and high. The chains in the deep galleries had gone silent. And up in the dark above the library shaft, the great black tapestry was re-inking itself, name by name, healing the scorch marks of 1,000 years of cruelty, because the house that had judged two children worthy had begun, with their crowns settled firmly on its head at last, to become something other than the thing it had been. He found Hermione in the library, of course, because that was always where he found her, and she was sitting cross-legged on the same balcony 3 turns down where he had found her on the first morning, with the loom unrolled in the air before her, but she was not studying it this time. She was watching it heal. "Look," she said when he sat down beside her, and she did not have to say anything else because he could see it. The tapestry of the family's names, the living map of the house's bindings, was knitting itself whole. Scorch marks warmed and faded. Burned names re-inked themselves out of the old wounds. And new threads, bright ones, threads that had never been in the weave before, were appearing. Andromeda, restored, Tonks, born outcast and now woven in. Sirius, healed of his burning. Fainter, newer, the threads the house had made on the night of the crowning. The thread that bound Hermione into the blood by the adoption of magic, and the thread, bright and unbreakable and impossible to mistake for anything else, that ran between her name and Harry's, the coregnate bond, the anchor that had held against the unbinding curse. "It's not the same house anymore," Hermione said quietly. "It was dying because it had spent 1,000 years burning off everything it loved for not being pure. And we spent a summer doing the opposite, calling the burned off home, choosing by worth instead of blood, holding each other up instead of ruling alone. And the house is Harry, it's becoming what we are, it's healing into the shape of how we've held it." She looked at him, and there was wonder in it. "We didn't just inherit the House of Black, we're remaking it. Every choice we make, it weaves into itself. It's the most enormous responsibility I've ever heard of, and I have absolutely no idea how to feel about it except that I'm glad it's both of us." "It's both of us," Harry agreed. "It's always going to be both of us." And the thread between them, bright in the healing loom, agreed. The reckoning with Corvus Yaxley came that afternoon, and it was the first true exercise of the seat they had won, not the crowning, not the trial, but the cold practical question of what to do with a defeated enemy, and it was the question on which Harry understood the whole future of the House of Black would turn. They held him in the house. The wards would not let him leave, and the ministry could not be involved yet, because the ministry would ask questions about blood writs and ancient ordeals that no one in this house wanted answered in open court. So Corvus Yaxley sat in a warded room in the deep of the house he had tried to take, gray and composed and entirely without hope. And Harry and Hermione came to him to decide his fate, and Sirius came with them. And the question hanging in the cold air was the oldest question the House of Black had ever asked. What does the house do to those who move against it? The old answer was written in the deep galleries, in the curse vaults, in the burned names and the bound things in the dark. The House of Black destroyed its enemies. It had always destroyed its enemies, cruelly, thoroughly, with a creativity the rest of Wizarding Britain had spent centuries being afraid of. And Yaxley, sitting in the warded room, expected exactly that, and his composure was the composure of a man who has made his peace with the price of losing. "You tried to have us murdered in the trial chamber," Harry said. "You held the gate open for a curse that nearly took Hermione apart. You came into our house to help a dead woman's will tear out its heart." He let it sit. "By the old law of this house, by the law every Black before us would have used, I can do almost anything to you, and the houses would call it justice, and the heart would not stop me. You know that, that's why you're so calm. You think you know what kind of house this is." "I know exactly what kind of house this is," Yaxley said, level as ever. "I have spent my life in its shadow. It is the cruelest house in Britain, and I lost to it, and I will pay the price the cruelest house in Britain exacts. I do not ask for mercy. I would not insult either of us by asking. Do what your house does, Lord Black. I knew the stakes when I sat down at the board." And Harry looked at the gray man who had nearly killed the person he loved most in the world, and felt his temper rise, and felt out of long habit now, automatic, the architecture of them, Hermione's weight steady and quiet in his chest. But she did not say wait to stop him. She said it, he understood, to make him choose on purpose, because this was the most important choice the seat had asked of them, and it could not be made in temper. So Harry chose. "No," he said, "I don't think I will." He watched the first crack appear in Yaxley's composure, confusion, real and total, because he had prepared for cruelty and not for this. "Here's the thing about your whole life, Mr. Yaxley. You spent it on the order of things. The pure inherit, the strong take, the cruel win, and you lost to a cruel house, so now you pay a cruel price, and it all makes sense. It's all arithmetic, even your own destruction. And if I do what the old House of Black would do, if I destroy you the way your order says I should, then I prove you right. I prove the house is what you always thought it was. I prove the order's real, that it's all just blood and cruelty and the strong taking from the weak, and the only thing that changed is who's holding the wand." He leaned forward. "But the house is that anymore. We're remaking it. And the first real thing we do with it is not going to be the cruelest thing the old house would have done. It's going to be the thing that proves the order you spent your life on is a lie. You're going to let me go," Yaxley said slowly, and there was no relief in it, only a deepening bewilderment, a man watching the foundation of his world quietly removed. "We're going to let you go," Hermione said, "not because you deserve it, you don't. But because you have spent your whole life believing that power is cruelty and the strong always take, and we are going to be the most powerful house in Britain, and we are going to be the proof every day for the rest of your life that you were wrong. You'll go free. You'll keep your name and your seat and your standing. And you'll watch a half-blood and a muggle-born hold the oldest house in Britain and remake it into something better than anything your order ever built, and you'll know that we could have destroyed you and chose not to, and that the choosing was not weakness, it was the whole point." She stood. "That's your sentence, Mr. Yaxley. You have to live in the world we're going to build. I can't think of anything that would punish a man like you more." And Corvus Yaxley, who had come into the House of Black expecting to die, and was being sent out of it alive into a future that unmade everything he believed, looked at the two children for a long moment, and something happened in the gray, bloodless face that Harry had never seen there. Not gratitude. The man was past gratitude, but a kind of vertigo. The look of a man whose arithmetic has finally and completely failed, and who must now learn an entirely new way to count. He rose. He bowed, and the bow was not the assessor's bow, the bow before the kill, but something Harry had no name for, the bow of a man to a thing he does not understand and can no longer dismiss. "I do not know what you are," Corvus Yaxley said. "I came to this house certain that I did. I find I was wrong about every part of it." He moved to the door the wards now opened for him. "I will not move against you again, not because you spared me, I am too old to be bought by mercy, but because I have spent my life serving an order, and I watched that order break against two children tonight, and a man who has given his life to a thing must, when it breaks, at least have the honesty to stop serving it." He paused on the threshold. "The houses will not all be so easily turned. There are colder men than I, and you have made enemies that mercy will not soften, but you have one fewer than you had this morning, for whatever that is worth." And he was gone out into the healing house and the waiting world, and the House of Black had, for the first time in its history, defeated an enemy and let him walk away changed. When the door had closed, Sirius let out a long breath. "Your father," he said to Harry, his voice rough, "would have set the man on fire and called it a good morning's work, and he'd have been wrong, and he'd never have admitted it, and I loved him more than my own brother." He put his hand on his godson's shoulder. "What you just did, what the two of you just did, James never could have. The old me never could have. That's not the House of Black I grew up in. That's something better. Don't you ever let anyone, including me, talk you out of it." Narcissa Malfoy came on the fourth day alone, and her coming was the last piece of the political settlement that secured the seat for good. She came without Lucius. That was the first thing and the most important. Narcissa Black, the nearest free blood of the house, arriving at Grimmauld Place without her husband, which in the silent grammar of the old family said more than any letter could. Creature admitted her with a deep and ancient courtesy because she was blood of the house, and she came into the drawing room where the two children received her, and she did not sit, and she did not waste words. "My husband will not stop," she said. "I want you to understand that, because you spared Yaxley, and you may be tempted to think the danger is past. It is not. Lucius does not forgive losing, and he does not change, and he will spend years finding quieter ways to take what he believes should be his sons. I have been married to him for 20 years. I know him better than anyone alive. He will not stop." She paused. "But I am not here for him. I am here because of what you said to me in the antechamber of the Wisengamot." About my sister, Hermione said nothing. She had learned, Harry saw, when not to fill a silence. "You reinstated Andromeda," Narcissa said, and her cool, aristocratic voice did not break, but it cost her something to keep it level. "You called her home. 25 years ago my family burned her off the tapestry for marrying a Muggle-born man, and I stood in the room and watched my mother do it, and I said nothing, because I was a girl and I was afraid, and I had already decided to be the daughter who survived by being correct. And I have been correct for 25 years. I married the right blood, I raised the right son, I held the right opinions. And I have not spoken to my sister in a quarter of a century, because the family said she was dead to us, and I was too much of a coward to decide otherwise." Her chin came up. And then 2 children I was told to despise reached into the cruelty of my family and undid it in a single night for no reason except that it was wrong. You did the thing I was too afraid to do for 25 years. You gave me back my sister. And I find that I cannot stand with my husband against the people who did that. I find I would rather, at the very end of being correct, finally be right. What are you offering, Mrs. Malfoy? Hermione asked quietly. My blood, Narcissa said, and my standing. I am the nearest free blood of the House of Black, and that means something to the old families even now. My voice carries where yours cannot, in rooms you will never be admitted to. Lucius has spent the summer telling the houses that the seat is a delirium, an outrage, a thing to be undone. I can spend the coming years telling them the opposite, that the blood of the house has examined the children and found them worthy, that the nearest living Black bends the knee gladly, that the order is not broken but renewed. It will not silence the cold men. But it will turn the soft ones, and most men are soft, and that is how houses are truly secured, not in trials, but in 1,000 quiet drawing rooms over 20 years. She looked between them. I am offering to be your bridge to the world that will never accept you on its own, in exchange for one thing, your sister, Harry said. My sisters, Narcissa corrected, and for the first time the cool mask slipped, and what was under it was a grief 25 years deep. Andromeda you have already given me. I would like to be allowed to know her again, to bring my son to know his aunt, to undo before I die some part of the silence I chose at 12 years old. She drew a breath, and Bellatrix, I know what she became, I know what her writ tried to do to you. I am not asking you to forgive her, or free her, or call her home. She is beyond any of that, and the writ proved it. But she is still my sister, and she is still, somewhere under the madness, the girl I grew up with, and I would ask that when you remake this house, you remember that not everyone the darkness took was always dark. That is all. I do not expect you to act on it. I only ask that the house that called Andromeda home does not forget that Bellatrix, too, was once a daughter of it. And Hermione, the lady of the House of Black, the keeper of the names and the right of judgment, looked at Narcissa Malfoy for a long moment, and then she did the thing that Harry understood watching it was the truest exercise of her half of the seat, not the law, not the loom, but judgment, real judgment, the weighing of a person's whole truth. The house remembers everything, Hermione said. That's what the loom is, every name, every deed, the cruelty and the kindness both. We're not going to forget that Bellatrix was a daughter of the house. We're not going to forgive what she did either. Both of those things can be true, the house holds both. She stood and crossed to Narcissa and did something Harry did not expect. She took the cold woman's hands in hers, the muggle-born girl taking the pureblood matriarch's hands, and Narcissa let her, which was its own astonishment. You spent 25 years being correct because you were afraid. I spent 13 years being told I didn't belong because of my blood. We are not the same, but we both know what it costs to be made small by this family's idea of purity, and we are both now in a position to make sure it never makes anyone small again. Yes, Mrs. Malfoy, know your sister, bring your son, be our bridge. The door is open. It was always going to be open. That's the entire point of the house we're building. Narcissa Malfoy, who had not wept in 25 years of being correct, came very close to it then, and mastered it, because she was a Black and Blacks did not weep in drawing rooms. But she gripped the girl's hands hard once and inclined her head, and the alliance that would secure the seat through 1,000 quiet rooms over 20 years was made, not over politics, but over a sister called home. Dumbledore came to Grimmauld Place once more before the term, and what he said to them in the healing drawing room was the nearest the old man ever came to setting down a thing he had carried his whole life. I have spent a great many years, he said, turning his teacup in his old hands, believing that power must be kept from those who reach for it, and entrusted only to those who do not want it. It is why I have refused high office more times than I can count. As I will confess to you now, why I came to this house in June half hoping I would find some reason to take the seat from you for your own good. He looked at them over the half-moon glasses. I find I cannot, and I find I no longer wish to. You have done in a single summer the thing I have spent a lifetime fearing I never would. You have held great power and not been turned by it into something smaller. You let Yaxley walk free when both the old law and your own grief cried out to destroy him. You sealed the cruelest thing in your house rather than wield it against your enemies. You ruled at every turn warmer than the world expected and a good deal warmer than the world deserved, and the house has healed because of it, where 1,000 years of colder rulers only ground it down. You taught us most of it, Hermione said. The Wisengamot, the trial of right was your idea. We'd have lost the seat in a quiet regency hearing if you hadn't pointed us at the old machinery. I pointed. You walked the ground and bled for it and held it when it would have been so much easier to let go. He set down the cup. I came meaning to teach you how to survive what you had taken on. I find that on the one lesson that finally matters, you have nothing left to learn from me, and I perhaps a thing or two to learn from you. He rose, and there was a weight set down in him that had not been there in June. A long fear finally answered. I will say only this, and then I will let 2 children go and be children a while longer, as the house was wise enough to keep you. The world that comes for you next will not come with curses in the walls or claims in old blood. It will come the way Lucius Malfoy comes in drawing rooms over years with reasonable words and patient erosion, offering you 100 small surrenders that each look harmless and would, together, hollow out everything you have built. That is the war you have won the right to fight. The loud part is over, the long part begins now. How do we win the long part? Harry asked. The same way you won the loud one. Dumbledore smiled, and the worry was still in it, but the hope had finally and fully won out over the worry. You hold each other to it. You refuse in the 1000th quiet drawing room to become the thing you refused to become in the first, and you remember both of you on the days when one of you forgets the people you were this summer. I have watched a great many good people lose themselves slowly, a reasonable inch at a time, until they woke one morning as the very thing they had set out to fight. The only protection against it I have ever found is to have someone beside you who knew who you were at the beginning and loves you enough to tell you when you are drifting from it. You have that. It is rarer than any crown and worth more, and you must guard it more carefully than the seat itself. He moved to the door. Hold each other to it. That is the whole of my counsel, and the best I have to give, and I have given a great deal of counsel in my time, and very little of it has mattered half so much. He left them with that, and the leaving of it had the quality of a torch handed on an old man who had spent his life as the one fixed point the wizarding world steadied itself against, passing some small portion of the keeping of the future to two children he had decided, against all his long caution, to trust. And Harry and Hermione sat with it a while in the quiet of the healing house, feeling the size of what had been handed to them, and feeling under the size of it the thread that ran between them warm and whole, the one thing Dumbledore had told them to guard above the throne itself. The end of the summer came, and with it the question of Hogwarts, and the answer to it was the last thing that settled the shape of their new lives. "We can't simply not go," Hermione said, the night before they were due on the train, the two of them sitting in the library shaft where so much of the summer had happened. "We're 13 and 12. We need to actually learn magic, proper magic, school magic, not just the house's powers. And the world needs to see us being children, going to school, sitting our exams, being normal, because the more normal we are, the harder it is for the cold men to paint us as a delirium or a threat." She had it all worked out, of course she did. The house can hold itself for the term, it's not dying anymore, it doesn't need us every hour. Creature can keep it. Sirius is the heir, and he can act for us in the small things with Andromeda and Dumbledore advising. And we can come back for the holidays, and for anything that needs the voice or the loom directly, and the flu means we're an hour away if the house truly needs us. We rule from school. It's never been done, but nothing about this summer has ever been done. She paused. And honestly, I think it's good for us. I think if we stop being children entirely, if we become nothing but the Lord and Lady, all throne and no childhood, then we become exactly the thing the heart didn't want. It chose us partly because we were children. We shouldn't be in such a hurry to stop being them. "You've thought about all of it," Harry said. "I think about all of it. It's my half of the seat." But she smiled when she said it, and the smile took the weight out of it. They would go back to Hogwarts, then, the Lord and Lady of the most ancient and noble house of Black returning to school like ordinary children, to sit in potions and fumble through divination and play, if there was time, a little Quidditch, while an ancient house held itself quiet in London and waited for their holidays. It was absurd. It was, Harry thought, exactly right. The heart had chosen two children, and the choosing only worked if they stayed, in part, the children it had chosen. But there was one thing left to do before the train, and they did it on the last night at the Core Atrum in the deep gallery where it had all begun. The heart of the House of Black was quiet when they came to it, quiet and clean and no longer dying, and it knew them, and the green fire steadied in welcome as they came down the gallery hand in hand. "We want it to come back," Harry said. "Before we go, because the first time we stood here, we said yes to keeping you because we didn't really have a choice. Sirius was in Azkaban and you were dying, and it was already done before we understood it. We said yes because we had to." He looked up at the throne of star glass, at the captured fragment of the first dark, at the thing that had reached past 1,000 years of its own blood to choose two children it judged fit. "We wanted to say it again, properly, now that we know what it costs. Now that we've held it and nearly lost it and chosen it 100 times since. Not because we have to, because we want to." And the heart of the House of Black, which did not often deign to feel anything a living thing would recognize, felt something then, and let them feel it through their crowns, a thing that in a creature with a face would have been called joy. The joy of a dying thing that has been kept, of an ancient grief that has been answered, of a house 200 years alone that is alone no longer. "You said yes once because you had to," it admitted into them both. "You say yes now because you choose to. That is the difference between being chosen and being worthy. I chose you. You have made yourselves worthy. The house is yours, not because I gave it, but because you have spent a summer earning it, name by name, choice by choice, holding it up between you when it was too heavy for one." It paused, and the black light of it brightened over the two children. "There is one thing left that I have not given you because it could not be given. It could only be earned, and now it has been." The crowns changed. Harry felt his shift on his brow, the crown of soot and starlight that had settled on him on the first night, the office and the weight, the burned names and the constellation names turning in their cold, dark fire. It had always been a thing laid on him, a mantle, a weight he carried. Now as the heart's joy moved through it, it changed, settled deeper, became not a thing he wore but a thing he was, the crown and the boy grown into one, no longer a weight on Harry Potter but the shape Harry Potter had grown to fill. And beside him Hermione's crown did the same, the borrowed thing she had been so afraid would be taken back becoming at last simply hers, grown into the brow of the girl who had earned every facet of it, no longer a guest's circlet but a lady's own. And the thread between them, the coregnate bond, the anchor, the fusing the heart had made on the first night to hold a seat too heavy for one, brightened and settled and became permanent in a way it had not been before. No longer a binding the house had imposed but a thing the two of them had chosen and earned and would carry now of their own will, for the rest of their lives because they wanted to and not because a dying rock had decreed it. Rise, said the heart of the House of Black to the two children standing crowned in the deep gallery where they had been chosen. Lord and Lady Ascendant, worthy by the trial, secure by the seat, bound by your own choosing. The house does not die, the line does not end. Tauger's purr is unmade and in its place, and here the heart did a thing it had never done in 1,000 years, a thing that made the whole house ring like a struck bell in its place, a new motto chosen not by the cruel and the pure but by the two who remade the house inked itself across the healing tapestry above them, the words appearing bright and permanent in the weave where the old boast had been, not by blood but by worth, not alone but together. They stood there a while after, the two of them, looking at the throne and the healing house and the bright new words across the tapestry of their families' names. We did it, Harry said. All of it. We held the throne. We saved Sirius. We beat the houses and the writ and Yaxley, and we remade the whole everything. We actually did it. We did, Hermione said. And then, because she was Hermione, though technically the political settlement is only just beginning and Lucius is still out there, and ruling from a boarding school has never been attempted and will create approximately 400 logistical problems, and we still have to actually pass our charms exams and, Hermione. Yes. He turned to her in the greenlit gallery under the bright new words and the healing names of 1,000-year house, and he found that the thing he had not been able to say since the proof of worth, since the writ, since the night he made himself an anchor for her in the dark, the thing the thread had carried between them all summer without either of them having to put it into words, was finally sayable. They were 13 and 12. They had a whole life ahead of them to grow into it. But they had also held a throne together and faced the dark together and nearly lost each other and chosen each other again, and you did not do all of that and then go off to catch a train without saying the thing. I'm glad it was you, Harry said. On the first night when the wall opened and you stepped through, I'm glad it was you on the other side of it. I've been glad every single day since. The house chose us because it needed a seat held by two, but I'd have chosen you anyway. If there'd been no house and no crown and no throne, if it had just been us two ordinary kids, I'd have chosen you anyway. I want you to know that, whatever else we are, Lord and Lady, all of it, under all of it, the part that matters most to me is just you. And Hermione Granger, who had spent her whole life being told she did not belong, who had walked through a wall of dark in a nightdress because Harry Potter was on the other side of it, who had been crowned and tested and nearly unmade, and had earned every facet of a crown an ancient house had reached past its own blood to give her, looked at the boy who had made himself her anchor, and through the thread, bright and warm and permanent and entirely their own, she let him feel the whole of what she felt. And then she said it out loud as well, because some things you say out loud even when the other person can already feel them, especially then. I'd have chosen you anyway too, she said. House or no house, crown or no crown, it was always going to be you, Harry. I think I knew it before the house did. She smiled and took his hand the way she had taken it on the first night in the gallery and 100 times since. Now come on. We've got a train to catch and an ancient house to rule from a school dormitory and the rest of our lives to figure out how. Together, Harry agreed. And the Lord and Lady of the most ancient and noble House of Black walked back up out of the deep gallery hand in hand, crowned, chosen, worthy, and choosing, leaving the heart of the house quiet and warm and no longer alone behind them, and the green fire burning steady and high the whole length of the galleries, and the bright new words shining across a tapestry that had finally stopped burning its children and started at last to hold them. Above them the house was awake and whole and theirs. Outside, the city went on, ignorant of the two children who had remade the oldest house in it over a single summer. And somewhere ahead of them, past the train and the school and the 1,000 quiet drawing rooms still to be won, lay the whole of the life they would build together, Lord and Lady Ascendant, not by blood but by worth, not alone but together, raising an ancient house out of ruin one chosen day at a time. It was, Harry thought, as they climbed back up into the light, the only kingdom he had ever wanted, and he had never once had to want it alone. Chapter 7 End.